Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Vivian decided to surprise her foreign fiancé and learned Italian, but accidentally overhearing his conversation. Before leaving the office, Vivian habitually looked at herself from head to toe in the large mirror by the door. Her blonde hair fell in waves over her exposed shoulders. The light dress beautifully outlined her slender figure. The length of her legs was emphasized by sandals on a low heel. The girl smiled at her reflection. Yes, she was completely satisfied with what she saw. She especially liked her own eyes, lately huge blue lakes, which now had a special light in them. They sparkled with joy, glowing with anticipation of happy changes. And love, of course. Yes, Vivian was in love for the first time in her 23 years. So much so that her heart jumped out of her chest at the mere thought of the person she loved. It turned out that all the romantic experiences that visited the girl before meeting him were not serious, even her feelings for Ben. Yes, beautiful, beautiful. Do not doubt it, smiled Vivian Amelie, a colleague about 15 years older than the girl. From the very beginning, she had taken care of the new young employee, who had just graduated from university, taking her under her wing. Vivian was grateful to Amelie for that. Thank you, she smiled radiantly at her colleague. Where are you going after work? On a date with your Italian. No, Vivian shook her head. You know, I decided to surprise him to learn Italian. It's the 10th lesson today, and I have to hurry. I decided not to tell him until later. He will be happy and surprised, of course. That's right, said Amelie. It is necessary to know the language. You never know. Vivian nodded, said goodbye to her colleague, and slipped out the door. A cab was waiting for her at the gate of the building. On the way to the language learning center, Vivian looked at the pictures on her phone. It was a long drive. The course was on the other side of the city. There was no place closer. English was taught in many places, but Italian only in this center. Apparently the language was not so popular, but it was easy enough to learn. Or maybe Vivian was so eager to speak the language of her beloved that she made rapid progress? Her teacher was very complimentary. Looking at the photos from last year's vacation in Rome, Vivian relived the pleasant moments over and over again. Here, against the background of St. Peter's Cathedral, she had no idea that a fateful meeting would soon await her. And here, not far from the Colosseum, Vivian had already fallen head over heels in love with the handsome Grace. He suddenly appeared in her life and immediately changed it, coloring it in 1,000 different colors, turning it into a kind of endless holiday. Energetic, lively, cheerful guy always infected Vivian with his positivity and good mood. And what compliments the temperamental Italian showered on the girl. They communicated in English. Vivian knew the language well, as she studied at a language school. Grace also knew it well, because she traveled a lot around the world and communicated with different people. The girl in general was incredibly open and sincere. She could find a common language with anyone. That trip to Italy was a gift from her parents. The girl graduated from the University of Economics with honors. Actually, economics never particularly attracted her. Vivian liked to take pictures. She got great pictures. She preferred portraits. Many noted that the girl managed to emphasize the inner beauty and uniqueness of people. Yes, you are a real talent, more than once exclaimed Ben. The same Ben with whom Vivian was in love all her school years. But he only saw her as a friend. Between young people since childhood were warm, close relations, however, purely amicable. Girlfriends also praised Vivian in the photo and often asked to shoot them for social networks. Nobody takes pictures of me as beautifully as you do, Trixie, a neighbor and part-time best friend declared. There's no Photoshop required on these photos of you, because you're very beautiful yourself, Vivian smiled at her friend. No, Trixie sighed. I'm fat and I have a potato nose and small eyes. But in your pictures, yes, I'm beautiful. Too bad they're the only pictures. But you're really beautiful from every angle and in every light. Vivian knew it was true. Ever since she was a child, Vivian had heard people complimenting her on her looks. She was blonde with correct facial features and huge blue eyes, graceful, fragile, with translucent skin. Vivian herself would like her skin to be darker, but she did not even tan, no matter how much she used special creams. Friends and relatives chorused about the beauty and delicate appearance of her porcelain skin. So in the end, Vivian accepted her aristocratic pallor. Still, she had always liked swarthy people. They seemed bright, strong, incredibly attractive and beautiful. So after graduating from university, Vivian first went on a trip abroad without her parents. She was accompanied by the same faithful Trixie. She had long since earned money on her own after graduating from college and could afford to pay for the trip. It was an unforgettable vacation. The friends spent the first half of the day walking around the historical sites of Rome with a tour group, as part of which they came to Italy, and then they had their own time to get acquainted with the city. The girls visited everywhere. They saw all the sights, walked along the labyrinths of narrow, confusing streets, sat in restaurants and inspected showrooms. But the greatest pleasure for the friends was to spend time on the beach. The girls quickly realized how to get there. You take a train at the local station. Half an hour and you are already in a paradise place with white sandy beaches, where turquoise waves roll up on the shore. My friends usually settled down under a free umbrella, of which there were always plenty. They took turns going to the sea, one to look after things, the other to splash in the warm waves. At one of these moments, when Vivian was left guarding the beach bags, he approached her. Vivian had long ago realized that her appearance, blonde hair, pale skin, is attractive to Italians. They are swarthy, with black hair, dark eyes. Blonde, for them, a miracle of wonders. The girl constantly received compliments on her appearance, and not only from men. Vivian, in turn, was charmed by Italians so friendly, smiling, and very, very beautiful. Vivian already had a lot of pictures of smiling, swarthy faces in her phone. You could make an exhibition. They were all so interesting, sincere, and lively. But Grace was special, the most special. Almond-shaped black eyes, a beautiful tanned body, a cap of curly hair the color of a crow's wing. Bright orange bathing shorts emphasized the darker shade of his skin. His arms and chest were literally burning with muscle. The guy had clearly spent quite a bit of time at the gym, but he didn't look skewed, just athletic. He then crouched down in front of Vivian, who was taking a salty bath, and smiled broadly at her. His cheeks formed charming dimples, which finally conquered the girl. "Hello," he said in not-so-perfect English. "My name is Grace. And you? How do you like the beach?" "I'm Vivian." From excitement, the girl could hardly form a phrase in English, although she knew it well since childhood. What English? Even in Russian, Vivian would not immediately find an answer. Such a handsome man. And not just handsome, but Grace had a special energy about him. He seemed to mesmerize Vivian with his black eyes and his open smile. "Beautiful," the young man grinned. "If you think this beach is beautiful, you haven't seen real beauty." Vivian could argue that she could see the real beauty right in front of her. "I wish I could take a picture of this handsome guy. But it's kind of embarrassing to ask." Usually the girl didn't hesitate to ask such a question to people. Only now it was different. Her heart was pounding in her chest like frantic palms in the gym. At the same time, Vivian desperately hoped that her interlocutor did not notice her excitement. There's a deserted beach nearby, just next door, and only the locals know about it. There are no tourists there. And there, it's much better and more interesting, the guy told her, keeping his eyes on Vivian. In his gaze, the girl saw interest and admiration. Vivian knew, of course, that she had an attractive appearance. Others often looked at her that way. However, their gazes did not have such a hypnotic effect on the girl. It had never happened to her before. Vivian sat down on the towel. The boy, after asking permission, settled down next to her. From the realization that he cared for her, Vivian literally blossomed before her eyes. "This is so great. It's incredible," she exclaimed. "Why don't we go to that deserted and beautiful beach and go for a swim? You, me, and my friend. I've been watching you guys for a long time. I've noticed that you're not alone." Vivian tensed. The idea seemed both tempting and dangerous. After all, she didn't know this man at all. Although on an intuitive level, the girl already trusted her new acquaintance completely. Still, Vivian had always been distinguished by rationality. And she couldn't just go out with Grace like that. He noticed it and slapped his forehead with the palm of his hand. "I'm a fool. I didn't even think about what it looked like from the outside. A stranger lures two girls into a deserted place, he said. I'm sorry, I just lost my head at your beauty. Immediately, I wanted to show you my favorite place, to share my impressions. My mom always says I talk first and think later, that's my trouble. Grace's remorse looked so comical that Vivian relaxed and smiled again. She wouldn't risk leaving the beach with a guy she didn't know, even if he was so handsome. But she didn't want to break up with him now either. If Grace left, they'd probably never see each other again. Rome is a big city. Why? What if I invited you and your friend somewhere a little more crowded? As if he'd read her mind, Grace suggested it. For example, there's a disco in town tonight at my favorite bar. It'll be fun. Will you come? Vivian immediately said yes. She'd definitely get Trixie to go to the event. She wouldn't even have to persuade her friend. She would be happy to spend the evening in a fun and interesting way. And then Trixie came to replace Vivian at her post. Seeing Grace, Vivian was a little embarrassed. Of course she was. Anyone would be confused by those beautiful black eyes. Trixie, always a little embarrassed by her fullness, stood half-turned toward Grace. She thought she looked slimmer that way. Vivian immediately realized that her friend was instinctively trying to present herself in the most favorable light. But after a couple minutes, Trixie's embarrassment was gone. Just like Vivian, she was mesmerized by the young man's every word and laughed at his witty jokes. The time flew by. The young people talked, becoming closer and clearer to each other. That day they laughed a lot, played beach volleyball, had fun on the beach. It was wonderful. Grace was polite, alert, and with Trixie. But both girls realized who was the real reason for his presence in this small company. Vivian melted with happiness as she caught Grace's admiring gaze. The sun was already sinking when they left for the hotel. We must go, Vivian said regretfully. I don't want to leave, but we have to get ready for tonight. I'll be waiting for you, Grace smiled at them. We won't be going away for long. I don't know how to suggest it without scaring you. Why don't I give you a ride to the hotel? I have a car right here in the parking lot. The friends looked at each other. They both had the same thoughts in their heads. On the one hand, they didn't want to take the train and then spend half an hour in it. The girls were a little tired from the water and the sun, the abundance of impressions. And there was a party waiting for them, for which they had to prepare thoroughly. It was much better to spend some more time with the talkative, cheerful Grace. And I wanted to see his car. Grace seemed like a man you could trust. Except that if all intruders were like intruders, there would be no crime. The girlfriends had their doubts. Grace looked calmly at the girls, waiting for an answer. Vivian suddenly, without expecting it, blurted out. Yes, give us a ride, please. Thank you very much. It seemed to Vivian that if they refused now, Grace would be offended, and she didn't want to offend him at all. Trixie nodded with a smile, confirming her friend's words. Grace brightened. The parking lot was spacious yet packed. No wonder the weather was hot, and many people had flocked to the beach to enjoy the warm, gentle waves. Grace led the girls over to a beautiful sports car. Vivian and Trixie looked at it. They didn't know much about makes, but it was clearly not a cheap car. The sleek, dark green, streamlined, a little predatory and incredibly beautiful iron horse suited its owner very well. Did you like my friend? Grace smiled contentedly. I've recently added to my collection. I love cars like this. Collection. Vivian suddenly looked at Grace with different eyes. There, on the beach, he had seemed simple, natural, very close. But Grace must be very rich. He had a collection of automobiles. Vivian felt embarrassed again in his presence. Wealthy people are like representatives of another world. How to communicate with them, how to fit in. Come on, Grace suddenly put his arm around Vivian in a reassuring way. His warmth and sincerity removed the awkwardness of the moment. The girls looked at each other and slipped into the cool cabin. The way he looked at you, Trixie shared her impressions in the room. She had already showered and was working on her hair, twisting it into tight curls. If someone looked at me like that, how happy I'd be. Am I exaggerating? Vivian argued. Now that Grace wasn't around, it seemed to her that she had made up his looks of admiration for herself, just because she wanted to. She'd gotten it into her head that this handsome man, who also happened to be rich, was looking at her in a special way. But in fact, Grace is just having fun, meeting cute tourists, having fun with them, just because he's sociable. And the blonde Vivian with her white skin and blue eyes is exotic for him. An interesting novelty, nothing more. "No way," Trixie exclaimed. "He's really fascinated by you." You could see it from the outside. Trixie's friend dispelled Vivian's doubts. "I'm even a little jealous." "Don't worry," Vivian said brightly. She was very encouraged by Trixie's words. "We're looking for a handsome man for you tonight." Grace picked the girls up exactly at the appointed time. The friends got into his car without any fear. This time the guy was on another iron horse, a black Mercedes. "I think this car is more suitable for the evening," he smiled, seeing the perplexity in the eyes of the girls. "Mercedes is elegant and beautiful, just like you." Vivian's attention was not lost on Grace, who looked at her with admiring eyes. It was no wonder the girl had done her best. She was wearing her favorite tight little black dress, emphasizing the graceful lines of her figure. It suited the girl, and she knew it very well. Diplomatic Grace showered compliments on both friends, but Vivian felt that his heart belonged to her. The guy didn't hide it. It was a marvelous evening, delicious wine, fiery dancing, fun until morning. Grace introduced the girls to his friends. There wasn't much socializing going on. First, the music was so loud that it was impossible to hear the interlocutor. Secondly, the language barrier. Not all of Grace's friends knew English. Nevertheless, the friends had a lot of fun. At the end of the evening, Grace even dared to kiss Vivian. They were dancing, pressed against each other, among a crowd of similarly heated young people. And then that kiss. Vivian was dizzy with surprise and emotion. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself," he smiled, looking his companion in the eyes. "You are so beautiful. You have no idea how beautiful you are." After these words, Vivian kissed Grace. He embraced her. It seemed to both of them that they were alone on the dance floor, but in fact they were surrounded by hundreds of people. Grace and Vivian met every day since then. At first, Trixie accompanied the couple everywhere, but soon she refused to be the third extra. "I feel like I'm just in the way, like the fifth wheel on a cart," she admitted. "No, you can have your romantic rendezvous without me," Trixie admitted. Vivian didn't mind. Indeed, she felt freer and happier alone with Grace. They took many walks. Grace showed the girl the sights that are usually inaccessible to the eyes of a tourist. The real old Rome, ancient and striking. And they also visited the beach, to which Grace had called her friends at the beginning of their acquaintance. It turned out to be a really beautiful place, hidden from prying eyes by low rocks. A kind of paradise cove. Soft sand heated by the sun, huge boulders, gentle waves, and nobody, absolutely nobody around. This piece of land was a whole world that belonged only to Grace and Vivian. "I want to live here with you forever, and never go anywhere," Grace confessed more than once, hugging Vivian, and she felt the same way. The young people got to know each other better and better. Grace told about himself. It turned out that he was the son of rich parents. His family owned several wineries. "We have a lot of vineyards in the province," Grace shared details of his life. "I have been accustomed to labor since childhood. I know everything about wine production from the very basics. My father says that the man who will get our empire must be able not only to give orders." Grace had an apartment in Rome, and he'd come here for a vacation once in a while, like now. But the guy lived with his parents in the province, near the largest of the family factories and a huge vineyard in the family estate. Apparently, it was a huge house with a beautiful, spacious garden and even a stable on the territory. Grace loved horseback riding. Recently, the guy, like Vivian, graduated from university. Only the girl studied economics and the young man studied management. Grace loved to travel. He told Vivian a lot about his trips, where the guy has not only visited Europe, Asia, Africa. Grace saw Stalinist monasteries and ruins of Mayan temples, admired the Grand Canyon, and photographed against the backdrop of Niagara Falls. Vivian listened to him with her mouth open in amazement. Wow! They were almost the same age. Grace had indeed traveled extensively and had a wealth of life experience, having worked in the family business since his youth. His generosity and attention to Vivian pays off. He gives her expensive gifts. pays all the expenses during their dates. His gallantry and aristocratic manners impress the girl. At the same time, the upcoming parting is very hard for both of them. Vivian is very attached to Grace. He has become for her a literally vital person just for this short time. Grace also clearly does not want to part with his favorite girl. However, he tries to reassure her, saying that this is not the end, but only the beginning of their relationship. Their fates are already intertwined, and they will not lose each other despite the physical separation. Gracie is soon to leave Rome as well. It is obvious that very deep feelings have developed between them in this short time. A difficult period of separation awaits them, but they hope to continue their relationship despite the distance and obstacles. The final scene at the night fountain is very touching and romantic. Work, business. I only stayed in LA. For you. It was my happiest 3 weeks. They were my happiest, too, Vivian said, holding back tears. I don't want to break up with you. We'll keep in touch. Social networks, messengers. I'll write to you every day, even every hour. If you don't mind, of course. Of course, I'm all for it, exclaimed the girl. But such communication, it's still not the same. I understand. I'll miss you too. I've never felt like this before. And as soon as business permits, I'll come and see you right away. I'll do that. I'm looking forward to it. Vivian left in tears. Grace drove her friends to the bus station, where a tourist bus was waiting for them. For a while, the guy accompanied them on his sports car, and then he left. All the way, Vivian looked at the photo of her lover. She took it on the eve of departure at the same fountain, where she couldn't stand it and cried in the arms of a young man. Grace smiled from the screen of the smartphone, but in his eyes read the sadness of the upcoming long parting. It was the photo that caught Vivian's eye now when she was browsing through the gallery section on her way to the language course. The girl smiled, remembering the touching moment. It seemed then that the separation would be eternal. Vivian had been afraid. Very afraid that Grace would quickly forget her. As they say, out of sight, out of mind. Vivian even shared her fears with the young man that last night and introduced him to a popular Russian, saying, "Well, I know another suitable phrase," said the boy, looking earnestly into Vivian's eyes. "Separation is like the wind, small passions are extinguished. But the big ones are only blown away. My feelings for you are so great that separation will only make them stronger and stronger. I miss you already." Grace kept his promise. He did write to Vivian often, sending cheerful messages, asking questions about her life, telling her about himself. Sometimes he sent her pictures of vineyards, sea, rocks. The lovers were constantly in touch. Surprisingly, Grace was right. Separation really strengthened their relationship. Young people recognized each other closer and closer. They became relatives, learned to feel each other at a distance. Grace periodically made surprises to his beloved. Hundreds of kilometers were not a hindrance for him. The guy often ordered the delivery of flowers and sweets. It was always unexpected and caused a smile and surprise to Vivian. She was pleased that Grace cared about her, trying to please her, even being so far away. On New Year's Eve, Grace gave her beloved a present. A courier delivered to her home an evening dress from a famous couturier. In it, Vivian went to the first corporate party in her life. There she made a real sensation. Men were lining up to dance with her. The lady did not refuse the cavaliers, but all attempts to continue the relationship stopped at the root. Her heart was no longer free. Vivian waited for Grace. He promised he'd come, so he would. The boy loves her so much. And Vivian was crazy about him. They're going to be together. Her parents knew about her daughter's relationship with a foreigner, but they didn't pay much attention to it. A holiday romance, Mom smiled. I know how dizzying they can be. I know it from hearsay, by the way. Just don't count on anything. Relationships like that are quick to start, but just as quick to forget. Trixie, too, thought there'd be no sequel to the torrid affair. Californians are just temperamental, unlike our guys. They know how to woo. Grace is cool, but I don't think he's really coming. If he did, he would have been here a long time ago. I mean, it's been almost a year. But Vivian didn't believe what her family said. She knew that Grace was just busy. He was helping his father run his business. And that's not easy. Grace would come to see Vivian if he promised. There was a lot going on in the girl's life at the time. After returning from a memorable trip, Vivian got her first job in her life. Thanks to her father's connections, she was hired by a local oil company as an economist. The salary turned out to be such that the girl aghast when she saw the size of the transfer for the first time. Wow. So now I'll be able to provide for myself. And with a lot of dignity, Vivian exclaimed. Well, we have a very grown-up girl, said on the day of the first paycheck at the family dinner Mom. Maybe it's time for you to move out and start living on your own. I think so, too, smiled the father, who looked proudly at his grown-up daughter, so beautiful, intelligent, and successful. A successful outcome of parental care and investment. Vivian clapped her hands with joy, just like a little girl. She had had her own apartment for a long time. Her father had bought it for her when she turned 18. It's your future, he said then. The apartment was wonderful, spacious, bright, located in the center of the city. Vivian was afraid to imagine how much it cost. But then, as a student, she could not move into a new home. You're not ready to live on your own yet, her mother said. Let it stand for now. The apartment is not going anywhere. We'll renovate it slowly. And you study, you'll grow up. Then you will move in, nodded my father. And now, in the opinion of her parents, the daughter, who began to earn money herself, was quite ready to live separately. A new job, a new apartment, a new relationship, albeit at a distance. So many impressions, so many emotions. Life was booming, playing with bright colors. Vivian sometimes envied herself. All she needed to be happy was Grace by her side. Communication via video link was one thing, but the feeling of his warm hands on her shoulders was quite another. And recently he showed up at the doorstep of her new apartment. Grace had called the day before, unexpectedly, and warned him that he would send a courier in the morning with flowers and a small gift. When the bell rang, Vivian assumed it was a messenger. She opened the door and was stunned, unable to believe her eyes. On the threshold stood Grace. He was holding a bouquet of roses. The guy was smiling broadly. Vivian's legs even gave out. She gasped. Grace deftly took Vivian by the waist. They walked into the apartment arm in arm. She didn't go to work that day. She called her boss and took the day off. She couldn't leave Grace when he was finally around. That same morning, Grace proposed to Vivian. He didn't wait. I want you to be my wife, he said, squeezing Vivian's wrist firmly but gently. I realize that I cannot without you. This separation has not been easy for me. I thought of you every minute. I wanted to be near you all the time. I can't go on like this. Marry me. We'll go and live in my apartment in Rome, just you and me. Do you agree? Vivian wrapped her arms around Grace's neck and kissed him instead of answering. Of course she agreed. Moreover, to hear such words from the lips of her beloved was her cherished dream, which was coming true right now. Her parents, having learned about their daughter's decision, of course, panicked at first. How is it so? You will live in a foreign country, away from us. You never know. And what if they hurt you there? Mom lamented. But after getting acquainted with Grace, my parents changed their opinion. The young man charmed them. They accepted the fact that the daughter will live in Italy with her beloved husband, and even rejoiced for her. And Grace generally liked everyone with whom Vivian introduced him. But you bet people are always attracted by sincerity, friendliness, sense of humor, energy. Grace had plenty of those. The only person who was not properly impressed by the handsome, wealthy Italian was Ben. Vivian frowned, remembering her childhood friend. He usually supported her in everything. How many times he had helped her out, protected her, comforted her. But this one was acting strangely. Trixie says it's jealousy. She says Ben's been in love with Vivian since he was a kid. That's why he won't accept Grace. But her friend is clearly mistaken. Vivian's been in love with Ben for a long time. What about him? He's only seen her as a friend from the beginning. When she was a teenager, she used to cry into her pillow at night because of it. What else could it be? She tried so hard to please her classmates, she chose outfits, did her makeup, tried to do her hair. And then she'd see him on the gymnasium in the arms of another girl. Was Ben the only one who found something in these girls? Vivian looked out the window of the cab as it passed the movie theater. How many times had she and Ben run here for horror movie screenings? Both loved such thrilling plots with unexpected turns of events. Vivian, of course, cowardly squeezed her eyes shut at the scary moments. Ben held her hand tightly, keeping his gaze on the screen. The girl hoped that someday in the darkness of the movie hall, her classmate would hug her. Maybe even kiss her, like his many girlfriends. But it never happened. "You're such a great friend," Ben said when Vivian let him copy his homework or help him with algebra. "You're so easy for me to talk to. Always accepting, always supportive. You're even better than the guys." Those were very dubious compliments for Vivian. She wanted Ben to see her not as a friend, but as her favorite girl. But it didn't work out. The childhood crush had faded. How many times can you knock on a closed door? But what remained were strong friendships. And Trixie? She doesn't get it. She got some other jealousy thing going on? Yeah, Ben's just teasing her, that's all. It's his usual way of talking to her. He called his friend's fiancée nothing but Angelica. Another convention. Too bad we don't know each other. I'd be texting her too, he said wryly. His name is Grace. What kind of name is that? I think it's feminine, masculine. It's actually Italian. Maybe your name sounds feminine to him too. It sounds like Andrea. Is that his cousin's sister's name? I don't care what he thinks it sounds like. He's Grace. That's all. Grace means angel, and Angel Ben is the one with the wings and the halo over his head. Thinking back on those joking exchanges, Vivian was smiling now. He's funny after all. Ben's sarcasm sometimes confused her, but Vivian was sure that if anything happened, he would come to her rescue. It would be a pity to part with him, friends and parents. But most importantly, Grace would be there for her, the man who made her heart beat so fast that it seemed to be about to jump out of her chest. Grace had been living with Vivian for almost 3 weeks now. Now he had the opportunity to leave the business for a while, but he had to return soon, and he intended to come home with his wife. The wedding was scheduled for the end of next month. It couldn't be sooner. All the nearest dates were taken. There were only a few weeks left. Preparations were in full swing at the mutual desire of the bride and groom. The wedding was to be a modest celebration in the circle of the closest people. True, the parents were a little disappointed. It turns out that they literally, from the birth of their little girl, dreamed of seeing their daughter in a bride's outfit and dance at her wedding to cheerful compositions. And here it is. And Grace's relatives aren't going to be there. As if the father cannot leave the business, and the mother, respectively, does not want to fly without her husband. Oh, that's okay. Then you'll get to know each other when you come to visit us, the daughter reassured her parents. We will show you Italy. Wonderful country. It's still strange somehow, not human, shook her head Mom. Even with the groom's relatives have not met once. But in the end, the parents accepted the decision of the newlyweds. The main thing that the daughter was happy. They saw the joy in Vivian's eyes when she was with Grace. Then so be it. The cab stopped at the porch of the Language Learning Center. Vivian paid the driver and went to class. Today was an interesting subject. Vivian was beginning to understand Italian speech, but only when people spoke slowly and clearly. And Grace, when communicating in his native language, spoke very fast. Basically, a lot of Italians talk like that. When the guy talked to his relatives or friends via video link, they answered him at the same pace, quickly and emotionally. Vivian could only make out individual words, and the meaning of the phrases eluded her. That was all right. Rome wasn't built at once either. She would learn. True, Vivian did not tell her fiancé about her lessons. She was preparing a surprise for the young man. He would be surprised when Vivian once addressed him in the purest Italian. The girl was fluent in English and French. Probably because of this, learning Italian was so fast. Vivian was far ahead of her classmates, so she was transferred to the next level ahead of schedule. And now she had almost mastered the next stage. Vivian wandered leisurely through the park in her own thoughts. The wedding date was approaching. Grace was still staying with her. It was wonderful. While Vivian worked, he cleaned the rooms, cooked delicious Italian meals. Often he would greet his fiancée with a perfectly set table plates with the next culinary masterpiece, a bottle of luxury wine, even candles. Life with him resembled a magical, romantic, beautiful fairy tale. What would happen when they moved to Italy? Lately, however, Vivian, who was making progress in Italian, began to notice something strange. Grace was often talking to someone, with a man's voice coming out of the receiver. It sounded like the person he was talking to was unhappy about something. Vivian could make out individual words, as it was hard to hear. Debt's police crook Grace kept reassuring the man, assuring him that everything would be resolved soon. He did it in an exaggeratedly calm tone, probably so that Vivian would not guess the trouble. Most likely her lover did not want to upset her. The guy didn't even suspect that his fiancée now understood Italian, so he thought that the girl did not know about anything. And Vivian? She still shared her concerns with Trixie. Vivian shrugged her shoulders. Who else to share it with? Her parents had only recently gotten used to the idea of their daughter marrying a foreigner and moving to another country for permanent residence. No, they cannot be worried unnecessarily. There remains a faithful friend. She always listens and supports. What's so strange? Trixie dismissed it. He's a businessman. A business is always some kind of problem that has to be dealt with as it comes. It's just business as usual for him. That's why he seems calm. I think this man is threatening him, calling him a crook and threatening the police. I wouldn't worry if I were you. Your Grace will handle it. He's an experienced businessman. You're working yourself up, and he's not even paying much attention to the person he's talking to. But if you're so worried about it, just talk to Grace, and it'll all work out, Trixie suggested. No, Vivian smiled. I don't want him to know I'm learning Italian yet. Let it be a surprise. Your picture, Trixie grinned. How do you want it? Vivian wandered through the park where she loved to play with her friends as a child. Just next to the road you cross it and the native yard, her parents' house. Today after work, Vivian decided to stop by her parents' house to pick up some documents. The upcoming meeting was a joy. The girl was quickly beginning to miss both her mom and dad. It was still unclear to her how she would be able to be without them for so long. You can't go to another country very often. Everything. So she would have to communicate through the laptop screen. By the way, Grace is as reverent as his fiancée is about her mother. He often calls her and talks to her via video link. Future mother-in-law Vivian is still a very young and spectacular woman. She has the same as her son's expressive eyes, black eyebrows, well-defined lips, and swarthy skin. And this woman's hair always looks like she just came out of a beauty parlor, dark, shiny, slightly curly. Yes, this lady is gorgeous. No wonder the wife of a successful businessman, owner of several wineries and hundreds of hectares of vineyards, must live up to her status. Vivian, too, would eventually become an elegant woman like her mother-in-law. Grace's mother smiled at Vivian from her laptop screen, spoke to her in Italian, and generally seemed friendly. Grace had said more than once that his mother was pleased with her son's choice. You are a wonderful girl, very beautiful, sweet, well-mannered, he passed on the words of his mother. And my mother also thinks that we will make wonderful children, her grandchildren, because we are very different in appearance. And such a mix of genes is always interesting. Vivian smiled then. At that time she was not as fluent in Italian as she is now. That's why she couldn't communicate with her future relative who didn't know English, but she was very anxious to do so. Grace's mother seemed to be a very pleasant and interesting conversationalist. They will surely find a common language. It was true that more often mother and son talked on the phone. Vivian heard sometimes fragments of their conversations, only Grace's lines because his mother spoke quietly. They seemed to be discussing plans for the future. At least Grace kept promising her that everything would be fixed very soon, and he would fix everything as soon as he got there. Apparently, the woman just missed her son very much. Vivian. Hello, a very familiar male voice sounded behind her. The girl turned around and couldn't hold back a smile. Ben was rushing towards her, spreading his arms for a friendly hug. How long it's been since we've seen each other. We used to spend so much time together. You look great. Ben praised Vivian with an attentive look. Despite the fact that she would soon be Grace's wife, Vivian felt butterflies in her stomach at the compliment. Her body must have reacted in the usual way. Vivian had been secretly in love with Ben for so long, and he had only seen her as a friend. Yeah, Ben was a great friend. And from the bullies Vivian protected, and with the boys teased her in a manly talk, and in the evenings met a neighbor at the bus stop when her father could not. Vivian was choreographing at the time. Rehearsals ended late, and the road from the bus stop to home in the dark seemed dangerous to the girl. But next to Ben, smiling, cheerful, reliable, she always felt like behind a stone wall. They were classmates from the 1st to the 11th grade, sometimes even sitting at the same desk, but they were usually quickly seated. Ben shamelessly cheated from the excellent Vivian, and she only encouraged it. Of course, such a thing could not pass the attention of teachers, so they covered it up. But Vivian managed to pass the cheat sheets to Ben, even when they were sitting at different ends of the class. Ben was very good-looking, tall, athletic, cheerful, with green eyes framed by thick lashes and hair the color of ripe wheat. He had the right facial features. Since he was a little boy, he had been a joker and the soul of the company. He played sports and guitar. He also read a lot, though more fiction and adventure novels. If he swallowed textbooks with the same zeal, he would be an excellent student. But the guy was attracted to other things: socializing, parties, hiking. Around him always hovered people's secret and frank admirers, buddies, friends. He was like a magnet for adventure and often became the hero of interesting stories. His life was like a soap opera. Vivian used to be desperately jealous when she saw Ben strolling along with his girlfriend. But he never noticed. He told her about his girlfriends. At first, he admiringly described the girl's virtues, and after a while he shared his disappointment and sadness. Vivian always listened to his friend and, if necessary, supported him with a word or gave valuable advice. "You understand me like no one else," Ben confessed more than once. "It's even strange, as if you could read my mind." "It's because we grew up together," she smiled back. "I guess that's why it's so easy with you. It feels so good." Vivian nodded in response. She felt exactly the same way, only she also wanted Ben to hug her, to kiss her, to hold her close. Only Vivian had never once even hinted to the guy about her feelings. Why not? Because she was afraid, I guess. Because what if confessing would push Ben away from her? And even if it didn't, it would make things awkward between them. It's not going to be as easy and pleasant as it was before. No, let it go on as it was. However, once Vivian was still close to opening up to a childhood friend. Then 18-year-old Ben, a second-year student at a local engineering school, suddenly decided to get married. The news came as a thunderbolt to Vivian. She still hoped that one day the guy would pay attention to her, not only as a friend. It happens. But if Ben gets married, Vivian's dream will not come true. The guy's girlfriend was a classmate. Vivian often saw them together. She was a spectacular person, with a lush shape and bright red hair. Not like Vivian herself, thin, almost transparent, and pale as a moth. At that moment, the girl saw herself as unassuming and unattractive. At least Ben's future wife certainly outshone her with her brightness and temperament. Before the wedding, Ben walked around a little anxious. He tried to behave as before, joking, having fun, making jokes. But Vivian could see that her childhood friend had something wrong with him. "Why did you decide to get married so early?" One day she dared to ask a direct question. "I still have to study and study. I'll have to work here. What about university?" Vivian knew that Ben had dreamed of becoming a ship mechanic since childhood. That's why he went to engineering school. It took a lot of hard work, but he did it. And he was very proud of it. You see, then looked seriously at Vivian. "Ben, she's expecting a baby, so there's not much of a way out." "Do you love her?" Vivian blurted out before she could think about what she was saying. "Yes, I do. Of course I love her," Ben said, a little uncertainly. How many tears Vivian had shed afterward, face buried in her pillow. Now she felt sorry not only for herself, who had lost her last hope of happiness with the man she loved. She felt sorry for Ben, too. She'd realized during that brief conversation that her friend was clearly unhappy, not by accident, because of circumstances. It had happened that way. Of course, Ben would marry the girl. He's always been honest and responsible, and then he'll spend the rest of his life suffering with a wife he doesn't love. Vivian sobbed over this life tragedy that could never be undone. But the wedding never took place. One day, Ben overheard the bride talking to another guy. In this dialogue, she admitted to that young man that the child is definitely his, swore, cited evidence, the timing of their dates. Her interlocutor clearly did not want to get married, so the lady had no other choice but to set up a date with Ben. You see, Ben shared the details of the story with Vivian. She told me over the phone that when she found out she was pregnant and I didn't want to get married, she decided to dump the baby on me. I didn't realize why she was so clingy to me at parties, even though she'd never noticed before. I was naive. After that night, she told me she was expecting a baby with me, and we need to formalize our relationship sooner rather than later. Of course, when Ben heard this dialogue, he demanded an explanation. His fiancée tried to make up something, somehow to get out of the situation. But Ben had already heard everything with his own ears. He then met with the child's real father to make sure, and he confirmed it. He also cursed Ben with a swear word and a naive young man. In the end, the man married his desperate girlfriend and recognized the baby, and Ben was spared having to live with someone he didn't love and learned a valuable lesson. So in the end, everything ended well for everyone. From then on, Ben became more careful. Now he was more careful about choosing girls and never made such mistakes again. Ben graduated from college and, as he had once dreamed, got a job on a ship as a mechanical engineer. Their town was located on the bank of a large, full-flowing river. Steamships and cargo ships traveled along it, so the demand for smart specialists was high. A river. It's great, of course, but I dream of big water. I wish I could go to the sea sometimes. Ben shared his thoughts with Vivian. But you have to move somewhere, don't you? Said the girl. Yes, you're right, Ben agreed. But it's for the best. New places, new life. It's getting crowded here. Vivian felt uneasy at the thought of not having Ben around. She was so used to him. She could call Ben at any time of the day or night to ask for help and know that he would be there. Ben had proven his reliability time and time again. He'd picked up Vivian and her friends from the nightclub when suspicious guys were hitting on them that night. The girls were afraid, but Ben came to pick them up in his used car. He had just recently gotten his license at the time, and his father had bought him a practice car. And with the repair of the roof at his father's cottage, Vivian helped. His parents even jokingly called the neighbor boy their son-in-law. He didn't mind. And once there was a funny case, Vivian stayed the night alone. Her parents had gone to the village to visit relatives. It was summer, it was hot, and suddenly the girl noticed a huge spider on the wall. She'd never seen such a thing before. It was the size of her fist. Of course, the girl squealed loudly and then dialed Ben. He rushed over and spent an hour trying to catch the monster. Finally, the guy managed to cover the spider with a pelvis and shove it into a jar. Later, it turned out to be the pet of their upstairs neighbor. He kept rare insects in his terrarium, and this spider escaped during feeding, and on some passages got to Vivian's apartment. The girl was grateful to Ben for all these situations. To know that you have a person who is always ready to help, it is worth a lot. Of course, Vivian didn't want him to go anywhere out of town, although her childhood crush, as she thought, had already passed at that point. But a trusted friend is even better. Lovers quarrel and separate, but friendship is forever. And now they met by chance in the park and were very happy to see each other. "Are you going to your parents?" Ben asked. Yes, Vivian smiled at him. "I'm getting the papers together because the wedding is coming up. Then we're going to Italy right away." "Italy?" Ben grimaced. "You've thought this decision over so well, haven't you?" "Of course I have. Why are you reacting this way?" "Why don't we sit down on the bench and talk?" Ben suggested. Vivian nodded. She didn't mind. She always enjoyed spending time with a friend. "You see," the boy began, as they settled down on the bench under the lantern. "It's a shame about that one, Grace." "His name is Grace," Vivian corrected angrily. She didn't like it when Ben called her fiancé so disparagingly. "All right, Grace is kind of slippery, insincere. I've seen him a couple times, but I've noticed that he's going out of his way to make everyone like him, and everyone's falling for it." "Everyone but you?" "Yes, except me." Ben nodded his head. "Don't you think you're making a big mistake now? You're safe here. You have friends, parents, a job, an apartment. You're protected from every angle and out there. I can't protect you there." That last sentence struck a deep chord in Vivian's soul. Ben. He was so used to protecting her that he was afraid to let her go to a foreign country because he couldn't look after her. "I don't need protecting," Vivian smiled at him. Grace and I love each other. We have a wonderful relationship. I saw Trixie the other day. She says your husband's having some business problems. What a talker, Vivian said jokingly. Yes, I was sharing my worries with her. Grace was discussing his problems with someone on the phone. Well, it's okay, he'll get over it. Businessmen have problems all the time. They happen all the time. I wish he'd solved his problems first, then gone to his fiancée. Ben shook his head. A normal man would have done that. You're acting like the strict older brother I never had, Vivian grinned. But it feels good. If you'd gotten to know Grace better, you might have liked him. I doubt it. Ben shook his head. He's slippery. He's got something dirty on his mind. I'm a good judge of character. That's why I almost married that redhead who tricked you into getting pregnant. He reminded Vivian of an incident from his youth. She thought the boy was going to smile and say something funny, but he only shook his head seriously and said, "Well, you compare. I was almost a child then, an 18-year-old kid. I'm not that man anymore. I can see Grace is up to something. I don't want you to be his victim or a means to some end." That's ridiculous. He loves me. That's what Trixie tells me. And that Italian looks at you with admiration. He anticipates your every wish and showering you with gifts. But you good and honest girls don't need much. You're easily fooled. But what do you think it would profit Grace to marry me? Vivian put her hand on Ben's shoulder. A friendly, soothing gesture. Money. A marriage of convenience. But that's silly. He's a rich man. I'm the daughter of middle-class parents. So what's the catch? Are you sure he's that rich? Did you ask him for his real estate documents? Did you even look at his passport? Did you see his income statement? What are you talking about? No, of course not. I didn't ask him any of that. It's obvious. He lived in Italy. He drove around in fancy cars. And he paid for us everywhere. He gave me expensive gifts and even paid for our wedding. A modest dinner at a restaurant. You don't need a lot of money for that. And your presents aren't that fancy. Trixie told me all about it with delight. Of course he had her fooled. But bouquets of flowers, candy, even a dress. It's not like your rich man's that broke. Even a student can afford that. Is that really the point? Vivian was getting angry. Why are you even picking on him? I'm sorry, Ben suddenly softened. It's just that I'm very, very afraid for you. You know, worried. Don't be. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be great. I hope so. The conversation with Ben had thrown Vivian off balance. Until that dialogue, she'd thought she was doing the right thing. But her childhood friend had touched a note of doubt in her soul. Vivian herself was tormented by a vague premonition, something elusive. Grace behaved impeccably, still looked at the bride with admiration, still tried to please her in everything. He also showered her with compliments and spoke of their wonderful future together. But sometimes there was something in his gaze. Either discontent or contempt. The girl wrote it off as homesickness and concern about the affairs left so long in Italy. Probably Grace was worried about how things were going without him there. But nothing. Soon they will fly to Italy and live happily ever after. Just like in a fairy tale. It's a little scary, of course. Another country, another mentality. Everything is completely different. No friends around, no relatives. Ben's right about that. On the other hand, they will all come to visit her, and Vivian will gladly introduce them to a wonderful sunny country. Beautiful streets, gentle sea, smiling passers-by. Not at all like the streets of their hometown. Most importantly, she and Grace will be together. The feelings between them are so sincere and strong. Together they could handle anything. If Vivian had any doubts after her conversation with Ben, Grace, who greeted her with a wide smile and a warm embrace, immediately remedied the situation. He loves her. They will be happy together. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. Grace was sitting in the other room, typing a message to someone on his laptop. It was a routine thing to read business emails, send replies. Big business requires constant involvement. The guy often repeated the phrase. Vivian liked that Grace seemed so easygoing, cheerful, and even a little joking. But at the same time, when it came to business, he was collected, responsible, serious. You couldn't go wrong with him. Grace, of course, is good in himself, with such a nice heaven and a coven. But Vivian wouldn't be living in a crib, more like a palace. A rich, handsome Italian is in love with her and is ready to do anything for her. Vivian could not imagine such a thing even in her wildest fantasies. No, the girl always knew what young people like. This was evidenced by the numerous compliments and the corresponding looks of guys. Vivian back in school was often called for dates, and at the graduation she was constantly invited to dance. The girl was even tired and wanted to sit a little and take a break, only afraid to offend the cavaliers. But still, Grace is so handsome, so rich, and so smart. He needs a girl to match him. A Hollywood actress or a top model, no less. And he chose her, a simple girl. Pretty sure, but not a star or the daughter of wealthy parents. It's weird. Too much like a fairy tale. Trixie was jealous in a good way, and even asked Vivian to look around to see if there was a suitable suitor. Why? It would be wonderful to have a childhood friend suddenly at her side. Of course, Vivian would try to introduce Trixie to someone. Grace, it turns out, has a lot of brothers, even if they're not siblings. He's an only child himself. Trixie's cute, even though she's self-conscious about her supposed fullness. Isn't she a bride? And what wonderful photos Vivian will take in Italy. She already has a page on the internet where she posts her work and praises it. Even asks to sell some pictures. They are really beautiful. Vivian knows how to notice interesting and unusual things. But Italy is a completely different nature and architecture. Exotic, colorful. Vivian already anticipated the future excitement on her page. She will definitely familiarize her compatriots with this unique country through photos. Let them admire it too. Maybe she will even realize her dream. As the wife of a wealthy man, Vivian will probably be able not to work. Why should she? If Grace is going to provide for her family, and what would she do? Her degree in economics is unlikely to be valid in a foreign country. Different laws, different accounting rules. But the girl will be able to do her favorite thing. She'll take pictures. Who knows, maybe in the future it will bring her not only pleasure, but also money. And if not, it's okay. Now you don't have to worry about finances. Grace is incredibly rich. It's a very nice addition to the man you love. And then the phone rang. Grace. Someone was on the video conference. Vivian was all ears. No, she wasn't the type to eavesdrop on conversations out of curiosity. She just wanted to check herself to see how far she'd gotten in her Italian. Matthew, one of Grace's cousins, was on the line. First, the boys greeted each other, exchanged news, and in this short dialogue, to her satisfaction, Vivian understood every word clearly. But then the conversation took a strange turn. The girl understood everything, but she forgot to think about her success in Italian. The content of the dialogue was too suspicious and disturbing. Well, are you going to get the money soon? Matthew questioned. And you think this kind of thing is quick? Grace's voice sounded annoyed. The wedding, the moving. Then there's still time to get it ready. So why don't we start preparing now? What's the holdup? No, you can't scare her off. You don't know anything about these things. Vivian froze on her bed. What was that now? Was it really about her? What should she be prepared for? What would scare her off? Somehow this all sounded very unpleasant. And then I remembered what Ben had said about Grace being slippery. He did seem that way now. Are you sure your plan will work? Matthew clarified with a clear threat in his voice. I'm sure it's almost done. Just the finishing touches are left. Well, watch this, or you know you're in debt. And if you can't pay it back in money, we'll take it another way. It won't come to that. Grace tried to speak in a steady voice, but it was clear that he was in anxiety. With that, the brothers said their goodbyes and Grace went on with his letters. And Vivian? Of course she could not sleep now and kept going over the details of the strange conversation. And she liked that conversation less and less. This Matthew, whom Grace called brother. He'd spoken to Vivian's fiancé in a dismissive manner, not unlike a cousin and business partner. Matthew was threatening Grace, and the latter was talking about some plans, money, and debts. Vivian's first impulse was to approach her fiancé and ask him directly about everything, but the girl held back. That was not the way to do it. If Grace is really deceiving her, he will come up with something convincing this time. If the groom was honest, Vivian's suspicions might offend him. It's not nice to know your significant other doesn't trust you. No, that's not what Vivian will do. Now she will simply become more attentive, will listen, look closely, notice some important details. Eventually, the girl will find out the truth. For the next few days, nothing unusual happened. Grace was as charming as ever. Vivian even relaxed a little, forgot about the accidentally overheard conversation. The groom had a hypnotic effect on her. His gaze, his warm embrace, and his words that seemed to be able to pacify, to make her feel happy. With no one else had Vivian experienced such feelings. Vivian had not experienced such feelings before. And yet, when Grace once again called her mother from Italy via video call, Vivian turned to listen. She was in the kitchen at the time, Grace in the living room. The girl was washing dishes. The water was running noisily in the room. That was probably why Grace was convinced that the bride had not heard the bell. But Vivian, after her fiancé's strange conversation, did not blame herself for her excessive curiosity. The girl went to the door of the parlor and listened. She needed to know everything, absolutely everything about the man with whom she was going to tie her fate. Grace seemed to be hiding something. Perhaps his conversation with his mother would resolve this doubt. Vivian already realized that her fiancé was not as sincere and honest as he tried to seem, but she was not ready to hear such a thing. Grace's conversation with her mother turned out to be quite frank. He opened the girl's eyes to the situation in which she found herself. "Hello, son," the woman said affably, looking up from the screen at her son. "Hi, Miss You and little Lulu," Vivian smiled. She knew that Italians had a very strong attachment to their mothers, and thought that was a rather lovely fact. Here now, the grown-up Grace had unashamedly confessed to his mother that he missed her and his little sister. "I wish you'd come back already." "So is the wedding coming up soon?" "In a week." "It's not much longer. Then we'll go straight home. We'll almost have to pack." "Does she know yet?" "No, it's too early to tell her. When we get to Italy, her relatives and acquaintances won't be around. It's a very different situation. I shall have much more influence over her there." Vivian froze. There she was again. They're talking of some dangerous plans for her, intrigues. What was going on at all? Vivian suddenly realized she didn't want to go to Italy, and Grace could hardly be trusted. "You're so smart," the woman on the other side of the screen said with pride in her voice. "Your father was the same way, but you're even smarter. You've had a lot of wisdom since you were a child. Does this poor girl really believe that you are in love with her? You're so handsome and she thinks you're rich." "Poor thing" is the most hurtful expression for Vivian's blonde, this woman, future mother-in-law. She smiled so affectionately in her face and called her beautiful, while she herself is like an evil stepmother from a typical fairy tale. "You know I know how to be gallant when necessary. We will take into account," she said. She just lost her head over me. And it's so easy. A very simple task. She's as naive as a child. Well, all the better. "You bet. Back in Italy, when I took her and that friend of hers for a ride in the rental car, I negligently forgot to remove the rental tag from the passenger seat. And she didn't notice. She believed I owned an expensive sports car. She was so surprised. You should have seen her at that moment." There's nothing to be surprised about. She doesn't understand Italian, so she didn't realize it. By the way, are you sure your fiancé doesn't know the language? They don't. She can only translate a few words of Italian, that's all. She's not very bright at all. Lucky for us. Maybe we shouldn't be so frank in front of her. Don't worry. First of all, we're talking fast, so she won't get the point. And second of all, she's in the kitchen right now doing the dishes. The water's running. That fool doesn't even know I'm talking to you. That's good, my boy, because I have a lot of questions for you. What kind of questions? I think we've talked about this a bunch of times. But let's go over the basics again. How are you going to tell the girl that you're going to live in a tiny apartment in Rome instead of going to our non-existent estate with huge vineyards? That's nonsense. I'll say that I have business in the capital and will stay in my studio apartment here for the time being. I've already rented it for a few weeks. Oh, it's costing me a lot of money. At first, I let the dust in my eyes, rented cars, took them to clubs in Italy, gave them gifts. Now I live in her apartment. I save money, like a hotel. but I have to buy groceries and cook dinners for her to maintain influence on her. Now I've got this rented apartment in Rome. It's okay. If it works out, you'll cover all your expenses and pay off some of your debts, Grace said. Yeah, the most urgent debts have to be paid off soon. Ultimo is harassing me, threatening me. He doesn't want to wait any longer. I told you not to mess with him, the woman said with concern in her voice. I thought I'd make good money with him. But that's how it turned out. Now I got to make it work. First of all, you'll pay off the motel debt, and then you'll take care of the bank loans. See if we can get out of this debt hole of ours. I'm sorry I can't help you. Come on, Mom, you're always so supportive, aren't you? Vivian stood at the door. She'd already realized that Grace had lied to her. Lied to her from the start. He wasn't a businessman, he was in debt. And Ben wasn't his cousin at all. Grace owed money to dangerous people. He's been pushed to the wall, and the charming Italian is desperately looking for a way out. The fancy cars aren't his. They were rented. The apartment where the newlyweds planned to go after the wedding was also rented, although Grace claimed he'd recently bought it with money he'd earned. Vivian had noticed the pride and fire in his eyes. It was horribly disgusting. It's also frightening, disturbing. It was not clear what part she, Vivian, played in this scheme. What was she to do with it? Mother and son continued their conversation in full confidence that no one would hear them, and if they did, they would not understand. Your fiancée, doesn't she know anything? Grace asked. No, why should she? She grinned. She's in love with me, like Juliet with Romeo. She looks at me with loving eyes and agrees with every word I say, so it won't be hard to convince her to sell the apartment, especially once we're in Italy, away from her family. And I'll give the money to Ben, and Ultimo will finally be off my back. Vivian felt as if she'd been hit over the head with a bag. That's it. Turns out Grace was in on the whole thing because of her real estate. Yeah, her parents bought her an expensive apartment in an upscale neighborhood. You can get a lot of money for that, and she needs the money, Grace. That's what her plan is. A young, charming con artist has run up debts. She's being threatened. She needs to pay the money back fast. So the bastard comes up with a brilliant plan, except it's not going to work. What luck that Vivian once decided to go to these language courses. A chill suddenly ran down her spine. She was scared. She is alone with a person who is probably a criminal. At the very least, she definitely had some dealings with Ben, and the latter is a real criminal by the looks of it. Grace is a scary person. I don't know what she's capable of. And Vivian is alone here, all alone. She took her cell phone out of her sweatshirt pocket and, without leaving her observation post, began to write messages. To whom? She texted Eden, of course, out of habit. He was always there for her in difficult situations. And now, his presence and support would be of great help now. Vivian did not leave the door of the parlor. The conversation was not yet over. What if she found out something else interesting? She did. Grace and her son went on to discuss how they'd gotten to Vivian in the first place. It turned out that the criminal couple made their money by seducing rich female tourists of all ages, staying in their rooms overnight, and then disappearing in the morning with jewelry and cash. As a rule, the women were embarrassed to go to the police. Of course, who would want to admit they'd been duped? A young swindler charmed you, complimented you, then cleaned you out and ran away. Ladies in that situation don't look so good, to put it bluntly. Yeah, even if the victims had gone to the authorities, Grace was virtually impossible to find. He chose a different part of town each time. Each time, he'd change his appearance a little bit and use an assumed name. And of course, the guy would find out where the cameras were in the hotel beforehand and try to stay out of sight. It was a win-win. Except it didn't make much money. Grace had debts, lots of debts. First, bank loans. The guy loved the high life, vacations, expensive cars, brand name clothes. He shamelessly took loans, which then, of course, had nothing to repay, because Grace did not work. He had no education, no desire to work for anyone. That's why Grace got involved with Ben one day. It seemed to the guy that it was a great opportunity to easily and quickly earn a decent sum. But something went wrong. Grace ended up owing dangerous people. They kept calling him, threatening him. The debt increased every day, which drove Grace to despair. He realized that if he couldn't find the money, he might not be spared. Vivian learned all this while standing in front of her own living room door. And then Grace's mother, who was well aware of her son's means of earning money, proposed a wonderful plan to her offspring. And from the conversation between son and mother, Vivian realized that the woman has great power over the guy. He is ready to do anything to please her. The lady didn't work. She kind of took care of the house and her young daughter. They were occasionally kept together by a man, another suitor for Grace's spectacular mother. But these were unstable sources of income that quickly dried up. The main earner remained Grace with his petty scams against rich tourists. It was the mother who encouraged the handsome son to make money this way. Realizing what was going on, Vivian felt something like pity for Grace for a while. It's a terrible thing to be used like that by your own mother. Vivian's unfulfilled mother-in-law decided that in the current situation, the cash and jewelry of rich ladies would not be enough to cover her debts. So she came up with a new, much more risky and complicated way of making money. If it worked out, Grace would have the money to pay off Ben. Grace's mother targeted Vivian herself. She found out through her channels that there were 2 young Russian tourists staying at the hotel and ran a background check on them. Of course, not only Vivian was in the field of vision of the clever ladies, but she turned out to be the most suitable candidate for several reasons. The first and most important, the presence of her own living space, an apartment in the center of her hometown, registered on the girl. Yes, Grace's mother had access to that information. I had to pay a small sum for the database, but the benefit of owning valuable information many times exceeded the cost of the purchase. Secondly, Vivian herself was the perfect victim. Young, inexperienced, gullible. First Grace's mother, and then he himself had watched the girl for days before acting. Hearing this, Vivian shuddered. She was being watched. She was so happy and enthusiastic she didn't even notice anything. Vivian was lucky that mother and son decided to discuss this whole story in great detail and talked about plans and even remembered the past. Now the girl was aware of everything. Further, the conversation between Grace and his mother turned to everyday topics. The weather, the health of some common relatives, the mischief of the groom's little sister Vivian. They made no further mention of their victim, but Vivian already knew all she needed to know. The girl returned to the kitchen and sank powerlessly into a padded chair. Her rose-colored glasses had just shattered with a crash and clink, and as it always happens, with the glasses inward, she was in pain. Unbearably hurt that the beautiful fairy tale and unearthly love had all turned out to be just a deception. And Grace wasn't the perfect prince on a white horse, but a con man. He has no feelings for Vivian, only pure calculation. According to Grace and his mother's plan, Vivian was to be the wife of the con man. Together they would go to another country, live in a rented apartment, which Vivian would consider Grace's property for the time being. Then the young husband would ask her to sell the apartment, and Vivian would agree. Of course she would. Grace would surely think of some plausible excuse. He'd been working her over so skillfully all this time that there was no doubt Vivian would sell the apartment and give him the money. And then the divorce. And Vivian would be alone in a foreign country with no money and no support. Of course, her parents would not abandon her in a difficult situation, would send money for a ticket, and the girl would return to her native country, where she would no longer have her own apartment. Even to imagine such an outcome is scary. In Grace, he would have gotten away with it, because legally he did nothing wrong. Vivian would have sold the apartment herself and handled the money herself, giving it to her spouse as she saw fit. There is no crime. It doesn't seem to exist in this situation. What kind of cunning plan? But Vivian did figure it out. She decided to wait until Ben arrived, to whom she'd written a couple of messages. Until then, she would do nothing. Who knew how Grace would behave when she realized that his plan had failed? I mean, this was a long-term project for the con man. The guy invested a lot of time, effort, and money to impress Vivian and create the image of a rich groom. The con man had to go to a lot of expense. Oh, he's going to be pissed. It would be better if Vivian wasn't alone at the moment of exposure. But the girl did not hold back. After speaking to her mother, Grace entered the kitchen with a fond smile on her lips. Now she seemed to Vivian unpleasant and insincere. But only half an hour ago she had been admiring the dimples on her lover's cheeks, which appear when he smiles, admiring and feeling happy and loved. "Shall I help you, my love?" Grace asked, pushing Vivian away from the sink where she was washing plates. I'm getting used to the royal life. In my house, you won't be doing kitchen duties, dishes, washing, or laundry." Here Vivian couldn't take it anymore. Restrained anger, despair, and frustration burst forth in a mighty torrent. "Of course I won't be a maid in your house," exclaimed the girl. "I shall never be in your house at all, because you have no house at all." Grace, perhaps for the first time since the day of their acquaintance, looked confused. The boy flapped his long eyelashes and shook his head. "I know everything," Vivian repeated calmly, looking into Grace's eyes. She was triumphant at this moment. He thought she was a naive simpleton, an easy victim, trying to take advantage of the inexperience of a girl in love. "Well, you got the wrong girl. Vivian isn't that simple." "How did you know that?" Grace seemed to realize there was no point in denying it. "You spoke too frankly to your mother in the purest Italian," Vivian blurted out. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, as the girl had once planned, she had impressed him with her knowledge of Italian, just not in the situation in which it was supposed to happen. Grace was angry. The girl noticed it at once. A bad glint appeared in his eyes. His hands clenched into fists so white his knuckles turned white. Vivian tensed. She was afraid. She suddenly realized that she had been wrong to snap, wrong to change her decision to hold on until Ben arrived. But Vivian didn't show her fear. "Get out of my apartment," she sternly ordered her estranged husband. "Right now I'll pack your things and leave them on the doorstep, and then leave immediately, or I'll call the police." "I will," Grace whispered, slowly approaching Vivian. She instinctively retreated to the windowsill. Like a frightened bird, she wondered what he could do to her in her condition. He was obviously up to something evil. "I'll leave, but I'll pay my expenses first. The money I spent on you. That's fair, isn't it? Give me your jewelry, your money. Your money. What else you got? I'll leave." That's how Grace's veneer of sincerity and benevolence came off. Now Vivian was faced with a greedy and unpleasant man, a fraud, a cheat, a deceiver who might even be capable of physically harming her. How frightful. "I don't have any jewelry," she whispered. Her fervor had worn off. Now she felt only horror in the face of the all-consuming danger that would rob her of her will and paralyze her. Grace rushed into the rooms, smashing and breaking everything in his path. Vivian could hear him slamming closet doors, searching for something to sell. The boy was desperate. In such a state, a man, especially a man like Grace, could do anything. Vivian tried to leave the apartment, but Grace pushed her away from the door and shouted at her so much that she immediately realized that the next time she went out like that could have serious consequences. Vivian sat in the kitchen with her arms around her head, listening to Grace ransacking her apartment. And then Ben showed up. Vivian had always been excited to see her friend. But now it was something special. The girl felt like a mountain had been lifted off her shoulders. Ben quickly assessed the situation. When he noticed Vivian huddled in the corner of the kitchen, he became furious. Cussing and fighting sounds came to the girl's ears. "Get out here." Ben literally threw Grace out of the apartment and then dialed the police. He spoke loudly and clearly so that Grace, who kept banging on the closed door, could make out every word. Then Ben rushed to Vivian, put his arms around her. The girl clung to him. She was shivering. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. So many events, so many emotions. Ben stroked her back, her hair, her shoulders, said something soothing and affectionate, nodding his words, not asking unnecessary questions. Realized that the girl was in the wrong state of mind right now. A few months passed. Grace returned to Italy. The police did not start a case of a con man on him. Lucky him. On his hand played the fact that he and Vivian had time to apply to the registry office, that is, considered a bride and groom. So the guy wasn't prosecuted for breaking into someone else's home. After all, the landlady was not a stranger to him. The whole situation looked like a personal quarrel, a misunderstanding between spouses. A domestic dispute. And Vivian had no proof that Grace was a con man and a con artist. The Italian left America a pauper. Vivian didn't know how he'd gotten over his failure. She didn't really care, by and large. Vivian posted her story on every travel forum she could find. She detailed how she had fallen for the scammer and even posted pictures of Grace. Perhaps it would help at least someone to avoid meeting the scoundrel, Vivian was not long worried, thwarted wedding. For it wasn't long before she received another proposal. This time from Ben. Then, that terrible evening, sitting on the kitchen floor, the young people frankly talked. It turned out that Ben had been in love with Vivian since childhood and therefore was very jealous of her overseas fiancé. And then when he met Grace in person, he was the only one of the company who was not affected by the foreigner's charms. "I mean, you were in love with me?" Vivian stared at the boy. The surprise that followed this confession, for the time being, even overshadowed the emotion of Grace's disclosure. "I was your secret admirer, and you thought of me only as a girlfriend." "You've said that many times yourself," Ben smiled. "All I had to do was watch your many affairs from the sidelines and wish desperately that I could be one of those guys someday." "What fools we were," Vivian laughed. "Thanks to that Grace of yours. He really is an angel, isn't he? It's thanks to him that we've finally gotten it all straightened out. I've had a crush on you since first grade. But I didn't think I'd be attracted to you as a guy. That's why I became your friend. So I could at least be there for you, keep you safe." Anyway, Vivian was getting ready to get married again, only with a completely different man. This time she had no doubts or worries. Everything was going right now. Natalie Phillips had repeatedly told Christina about the fate that befell her parents. From these stories, the girl knew that once in a distant childhood, of which she had only vague, fragmentary memories, she lived in a normal family with mom and dad. Her father was in business, and her mom was first a teacher and then a housewife. Christina's father's business turned out to be so successful at one period that he had ill-wishers, competitors. The character of her father was unbending and uncooperative. That's why he did not agree to share his income with anyone. Competitors, not thinking long, discounted and ordered his gangsters, putting a homemade bomb in his car. This is how Christina's parents died, and she herself was barely 6 years old at the time. The girl was placed in an orphanage, and the property of the deceased parents appropriated by rival criminals. Natalie Phillips was a graduate of the orphanage and Christina's tutor. She was on shift the day the little lost girl was brought to them. "Anthony, nicknamed Dumbass. There's a new girl here to see you. Pick her up." Phillips shouted in a gruff voice and pushed the naked, shaved girl forward. They didn't treat newcomers with ceremony in the reception area. There were rules: shave, parasite treatment, and disinfection. "She's the one whose parents were blown up in the car, remember?" Dumbass tossed carelessly, completely unconcerned that the girl could hear her. "They say he had 5 apartments and 2 cottages, all described, and there's no counting the cars and stuff." She jabbed a finger at Christina and wiped her nose, red from her excessive fondness for the bottle. "They've gotten greedy, the freeloaders. Serves them right." "Come here, Christina," Natalie Phillips called to the girl, resigned to the paperwork. "Well, come along. Don't be afraid." The little girl went meekly and obediently, not looking around. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and what was going on around her did not occupy her at all. "Are you going to eat?" Natalie asked her sympathetically. She sat the girl down at the table and placed a plate of rice porridge in front of her. "And meat babies. Eat up, sweetheart. Here's some compote too." Christina did not touch the food and still did not utter a word. So she remained silent for almost a year. She ate little, did not play with other children, and when in the fall she was assigned to the first grade here at the orphanage, she sat in class with the same absent look, touching nothing and reacting to nothing. Almost no one, except Natalie Phillips, gave a damn. After the first week of school, the boarding school teacher, almost 70-year-old Mary Agnesia, wrote in her beautiful handwriting in Christina Tregobova's chart, "Presumptive diagnosis, autism, psychological counseling required." What nonsense. Autism will come up with the same thing. "You," outraged Natalie Phillips after reading these lines. "Yes, the poor child is just in shock." "Just kidding. Life turned around like that overnight." "Oh, you poor thing." She hugged little Christina affectionately by the shoulders. "We must do something with you. Will you go to a psychologist? Now we'll have." Christina raised her big serious eyes to her, looked at her carefully, but, as always, said nothing. She clung tighter to the only person who paid attention to her and gave her warmth. She and Natalie Phillips had developed their own system of communication. If a girl wanted to answer in the affirmative, she squeezed her teacher's palm slightly. If she wanted to answer in the negative, she lowered her eyes. If she needed something, she would take Natalie's hand and pull her to where the object was, pointing gently with her hand. Most of the time, Natalie Phillips understood the girl, but the other teachers and nannies did not. And poor Christina was often harassed. She was especially disliked by that stupid nanny from the reception, and when she had to replace the night duty, she always mercilessly persecuted the poor girl. "Why are you sitting here like a madam?" She waved a dust rag at her when Christina sat with her feet on the big chair near the window. Christina often sat there, just like that, just looking at the street, at the big birch tree that grew right in front of the window of their playroom, at the birds hopping back and forth on its lower branches, at the rain drizzling outside the window, or at the frosty patterns on the glass, in which she pressed little holes with her warm finger, doing something with no one else to do it except to talk to the glass with her finger. Anthony Dumbass yelled and chased the girl away. She obediently got up and went into the bedroom. She lay on her stomach on the bed, turned her head to the wall, and lay like that. She whispered something silently to herself with only her lips. But even here she was not left alone for long. Only bums lie around in broad daylight. Go, and better play with the children. Christina did not know how to play with children now. She vaguely remembered that once long ago she had been in a similar place. There had been lots of children and caretakers then too, but all kind, like Natalie. She had played there, taken walks, slept on the same almost crib. And then her mom always came and took her, Christina, home, but she doesn't come anymore. Will the little girl wait for her mommy? No one told her that, and she couldn't ask. The words were no longer spoken as they used to be. And Daddy wasn't there either, and there didn't seem to be anyone else. It was just her, Christina, and her whole family was gone, and no one explained to her why or where. All she could do was look out the window and wait for her mom to come. One day, Natalie Phillips was on shift. Christine was sitting by the big window again. The teacher was sitting at a desk with her back to the window, filling out endless reports. Suddenly, Frozia shouted someone in an unfamiliar high voice behind her back. Christine around sharply and saw this picture. Christine, the quiet, silent Christine, was standing with her feet on the windowsill, staring down at the street. She was in a state of intense excitement. Frozia, she called out now and then, and beat at the glass with a trapped bird. Christina, Natalie was frightened. "Come on, Lisa, get over here." "No." The girl shrieked. "No, there's Frozia." "Who's Frozia?" Natalie asked, gently putting her arms around the little girl's waist. But she remained silent and only shook her head stubbornly from side to side. Finally, the teacher managed to pull the stubborn girl down and put her on her lap. The girl burst into tears and sobbed. She kept repeating the same word, Frozia. Natalie looked out the second-story window of her group and saw a small shaggy dog running merrily between the trees along the maple alley. An elderly, well-dressed woman was pacing gracefully beside her. "Is Frozia a doggy?" Natalie Phillips guessed at Christine. She nodded her head in the affirmative and sobbed again. That incident had stirred up some memories of her former home and happy life. It had released some long-held-back emotions. That same night, she ran in her shirt to the small room of the caretakers, where the girls on duty slept on a sofa and silently crawled under Natalie's blanket. It was discovered only in the morning, when the teacher woke up a little before the alarm clock and felt a small and warm baby's body under her side. She lifted Christina up and took the sleeping girl back to bed. And after breakfast, she pulled Natalie by the hand as usual and led her back to the room. The couchmaid showed her hand, saying, "Sit down." Natalie sat down and put the girl on her lap, realizing she wanted to say something to her. Christine opened her mouth, looked at Natalie pitifully, and then suddenly decided. "Frozia went out with someone else's aunt. I know Mom won't come again. Can you be my mom now?" Natalie's heart clenched painfully. She pursed her lips to keep from crying and replied, "Of course, honey. Only it will be a secret between you and me." "Okay, it's not like I can take you home. I'm your kindergarten teacher here. Do you understand why you can't?" The girl stiffened to understand, for Natalie Phillips did not find at once what to answer the little girl. Indeed, that because she was too old to bring up such a babe, because she had a sick old mother at home and a small salary, because she'll never be able to cope, she won't be able to give the girl, and then the girl what she so badly needs. And to deprive her of the hope of adoption and perhaps a happy life, she has no right. Because I have a very small apartment, Natalie Phillips said at last. That's all right, said the little girl eagerly. It's nothing. I'm so small I won't take up much space. And my old mom lives with me, Natalie Phillips added, almost crying. So it won't work at all. I'm sorry, but you and I are going to live here like family. Okay, the girl nodded. What else could she do, poor girl? Time went on and on. Christine grew from a little girl who was frightened to a teenager with long, skinny legs and a habit of biting her nails. No one ever adopted her while she was a toddler. A few times people had paid attention to her, but Christina herself had never agreed to adopt fodder, as the kids put it. Since she had seen the doggie in the window, her ability to speak had returned, and she was very vocal. And she had the character of one who would not put her finger in her mouth, and from now on it was not for her, but for the thin fools and other offenders. Don't you dare touch me, she said sharply one day to the night nurse who wanted to take her to the bathroom to wash off her eye makeup. Girls from the age of 12 had been getting the simplest shadows, mascara, nail polish, and other things of interest by unknown means, and were desperate to assert themselves in this way. Which princess is it? The babysitter grinned viciously. I'll get you now. And she reached out to grab the unruly girl by the scruff of the neck, but she turned around and bit her painfully on the back of the palm, jumped aside and stood in a fighting stance, like a cat ready to attack. Eyes sparkling, hands with painted sharp nails set forward. Only there's no hair, or it would have stood up. Devil spawn, muttered the nurse. But she didn't bother anymore, went and put a band-aid on the bite and promised to complain to her superiors. Just try it, threatened her unruly girl. I'll have a lot to remember, too. You think I don't know where you hide your bottles? She added mockingly. The principal will find out, too. She'll be a fool for nothing with rage mixed with amazement. I could not find anything to answer this insolence. She stood opposite for a while, glaring angrily at her opponent. Finally, she waved her hand, turned around and went to her duty room. When she arrived, the first thing she did was to look under the upholstery of the sofa, where a bottle of Boromotuka was stashed in a secret hole. But the bottle was gone, and the nanny shook her head mournfully, realizing that the nasty girl was not bluffing, and snatched her stash, while she herself was flapping her mouth. They had to give up their positions and call a shaky truce, and only to Natalie Phillips. Her sensitive secret mother, Christine, was still tender and affectionate. Often they were alone together in the tiny nursery. They were on duty, talked about heart to heart until late at night, drank tea with homemade cookies, which Natalie brought her favorite, and shared their simple secrets. Yesterday, Park from the third group asked me to go out with him, Christina said quietly to Natalie Phillips. What about you? The teacher affectionately rubbed the girl's thick blonde hair. I asked, smirking Christina. So that you know, next time to the basement, Howling did not give a howl, because I don't know what they have in mind. Natalie Phillips just sighed. The girls at the boarding school knew everything since they were about 11 years old, if not earlier. It was the nature of the institution. She couldn't help it. She tried her best to explain a lot of things to her group in an accessible and unobtrusive way, so that at least they wouldn't try to go to any lengths to get the details they were so interested in. There was a girl in the 6th form who got pregnant when she was 14, Natalie said. My God, where was Olivia Peters, their teacher, looking? You can't keep track of them all, they're so clever. But Natalie was not worried about Christina. This girl stopped such attempts quickly, once in the face, and there are no more who want to get close to her. Christine often asked Natalie Phillips about her dead parents. Who were they? What did they do? The kind woman, eager to help her pupil, extracted all the necessary information from Christine's personal card. And what was not there, told herself, as far as she knew and remembered. The whole town had been discussing the high-profile murder for months. She brought old newspapers from the library, where there were articles about her father and his activities as a businessman. There were also pictures of Christina, their parents, and her smiling little girl with her mom and dad. When she entered the orphanage, she was no longer smiling. Christina stared at the newspapers for a long time, reading from cover to cover all the articles and notes. Then she withdrew into herself for a few days, became silent and thoughtful. She didn't answer any questions at all, emotionally digesting the information she had received, she said to Natalie Phillips with grim determination. "When I grow up and finally get out of here, I'm going to find my parents' killers and avenge their deaths." Jesus. Natalie covered her mouth with her hand. "Don't think like that. You can't live in the past. You have everything ahead of you, your whole life. Don't break it. But you think I can live peacefully knowing that my parents' murderers are living happily off my father's stolen money?" Christina was outraged. That was the first time she and Natalie had had a fight, so to speak. But after a couple of days, they made up and apologized to each other, and life went on as usual. In the end, Natalie thought the girl had forgotten her hot words and her vow of vengeance, but time proved her very wrong. The first thing that Christina Tregbuva did, having received her documents on reaching the age of 18, went to the cemetery, to the grave of her parents. She sat there for a long, long time, whispering something to herself. She stroked their modest photo with her hand, and after throwing her bag with her things into a 10-meter room at the hotel, which she and her classmate were allocated by the state, she went to the registry office and wrote an application for the issuance of a duplicate of the death certificate of her parents, their marriage, and their relatives. In 3 weeks, she was given everything she had requested. It turned out that on her father's side, she had a paternal aunt and a grandfather who lived unknown where. And her grandmother, her father's mother, had died long ago, when her father was still a schoolboy. No one on her mother's side. "Christina, I want to suggest this to you," Natalie Phillips said to Christina the next time they met. "I have an old acquaintance. She works at our institute in the chemical and biological department, now a professor, PhD. You've always liked biology, haven't you? Do you want me to ask her to meet you? Let her talk to you herself, see something, maybe help you somehow with enrollment." "Thank you, Natalie Phillips. That would be wonderful," Christina said gratefully. "So we have a deal then? That's good. I'll give you a call. Also, tell me how you and Katie are settling in." "A little. It seems okay," Christina grinned. "Katie's a homemaker. She kept baking pies. Can you believe it? Treating all the neighbors." Natalie laughed, a little unsure of how to say it, and suddenly determined, reached out and slipped a few commemorative bills into Christina's pocket. "This is for you to settle in." "Really, Natalie Phillips?" The girl was indignant. "That's already unnecessary. I'll make do with enough. Is your mother sick?" "Mom died a week ago." Natalie lowered her head. "And now I'm all alone. Take it, please. Don't hurt me. You're almost like family to me." She looked pleadingly at Christina, and the latter suddenly noticed how recently the features of the kind teacher's face had changed so familiar and sweet. What deep wrinkles lay along the nose, around the lips, under the eyes, and the eyes themselves. How do they look now? Pathetic, sad, even wistful. Okay, she hugged Natalie. "Thank you so much for everything." Christina was touched. "That girl is mine." "Well, you come on in." "Okay, I'll text you the address. Come in, don't be shy." The second trip to the archives of the police department was not particularly successful. First of all, Christina came at the wrong time. And secondly, the woman at the window told her that such requests take a long time and are not always reliable. It happens often that when a person changes his or her place of residence, he or she does not indicate the new address in the registration card, she said, and then the information gets into the system very slowly. "Come back on Tuesday morning. We will make inquiries, but I would not count on any result if I were you." And it's been a while. Christine was a little upset, but then she thought for a while and came to the conclusion that she should not be discouraged. No one promised her that everything would be smooth and easy. She would have to make her own way in this life. After all, she had no one else but Natalie Phillips. At the thought of this old woman, Christine felt warm and happy, as if a small hot fire had been lit. Smiling involuntarily, she shook her head and went to the Central City Library to carry out the second part of her grand plan. "Good afternoon. Give me, please, a copy of the city newspapers for July-September 1998. She asked. What? I don't have a card. Yes, give me my passport." Having registered in the library as a reader, Christina received several weighty press copies for the period she needed and delved into her search, completely oblivious to the world around her. It's not that. It's completely irrelevant," she muttered in a low voice. Suddenly, she shrieked loudly enough to startle several readers who had come into the reading room with her that day. "Here, let's see," she said in a whisper. Co. Eugene Maxwell, a well-known businessman, the main competitor of the recently killed in an improvised explosive device explosion businessman Tregbabov David Vladimirovich. Previously, he had ties to informal gangs. He was the main suspect in the case of the murder of Tregbabov DV and his wife Tregbabov Allison. Guilt has not been proven. Criminal case suspended due to lack of evidence, Christina read. So that's it then, she muttered. Well, hang in there now, Eugene Maxwell. And tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and for a couple more days, she would come to the library again and again to read old newspapers, paralleling social media and other electronic resources. There was internet access for readers here, and she didn't have her own computer or smartphone yet. There was an old landline phone in the communal room. Until now, to think about it, it was her only connection to the outside world. But Christina didn't have time for that. She was just beginning her independent life and was determined to recover her father's fortune and avenge her parents' deaths. After studying all the information available to her, she learned the following. After the criminal case was closed, Co. Eugene, the alleged killer of her family, rolled up all the business and left town with his wife in New York. Escaped, then, Christina summarized. But it's okay, he won't run away from me. She searched the internet and looked around. The man was quite famous, and found out that Co. did not sit idly by in New York either. And soon he was doing about the same thing as in his hometown. He got into the structure of local government, first as a municipal deputy, then as a nominee of one of the political movements, and now he was back in a good position, which helped him in his business. I'm sure it's all on Daddy's money, Christina lamented to herself. She faced a difficult task, to find an opportunity and get close to this very Co. If possible, to get into his confidence, to get to know him better, and then, as a program maximum, to rob him to the ground and prove his guilt in the death of his parents. Christina was not stupid and perfectly understood that now she, a graduate of the orphanage, almost no chance. Chances to draw the attention of law enforcement agencies to her long-standing problem, a criminal case that had been lying in the archives for no, she would be smarter and not act openly. She'd have to be more cunning and try to defeat her opponent with her own weapons. How? She didn't know that yet, but she hoped to find a way soon. And if it would take years, let it go. She was young and ready to sacrifice her time to achieve her goal. A few days later, Natalie Phillips called her and told her that she had arranged a meeting with her friend the professor. Christine wanted to answer her on the phone that she didn't need it and had other plans. But she changed her mind and said that she would come to her house and they would talk. They quietly agreed that on Friday evening the visit would take place. It was the first time Christine had been in Natalie's cramped two-room flat. She, like all the graduates of boarding schools, had never been in the real apartment of a normal person who lived at home. She had long forgotten her happy childhood, now looking around with interest. The small kitchen was crammed with furniture, so that she only had to pass sideways between the table and cabinets. It seemed to her to be a specimen of domesticity. "How nice you have it here," Christina said, cautiously seating herself on a rickety old stool and taking a sniff. The violets sitting in rows and pots on the windowsill are beautiful. "Thank you," Natalie smiled at her. "Let's have some tea. Here, take some candy. I'm the only one who feels so empty here now. Well, now to business. Ellie Gavins will be expecting you Wednesday night at her department. She's seeing someone there and she'll talk to you afterwards." Natalie Phillips, Christina began. "The thing is, I've decided to go to Peter." "What do you mean, to Peter? Why?" Natalie marveled. "It turns out I have relatives there," Christina said, embarrassed at having to lie. "My father's cousin." "Oh, that's what." Natalie took off her glasses, sweating with excitement, and wiped them with a tissue, absent-mindedly looking at Christina with a trusting, myopic gaze. "Do you think she'll take you in?" "I don't know," Christina shrugged. "Maybe, and if not, I'll try to get caught up there somehow. Maybe I'll get a job, but I have to stop somewhere, unless you're sure your aunt will take you in, at least at first." "I don't know," Christina answered again, and she herself was beginning to doubt the feasibility of her grand plan. Indeed, where would she go? From the train station, and she had not a penny of money. The tiny government allowance would hardly help her find any housing. "You know what?" Natalie said firmly. "I'm guessing you just gave in to an impulsive urge. Tell you what, go see Ella Gavins on Wednesday after all. She's a professor in the applied biology department. Remember, her last name is Gavins. You'll talk to her. She'll evaluate your knowledge, your abilities. She'll tell you how to get into St. Petersburg University. Otherwise, it will be awkward. I asked her to admit you, and you won't come? Yes. All right, agreed Christina, and hugged her patroness gratefully. Well, I'll be off. Goodbye, daughter, Natalie said affectionately, and slammed the door behind the girl. She had never had children of her own. She had never married. Her old mother and her favorite violets were the only living things to which her long-lived heart belonged. Natalie did not say anything to Christine, but she had already decided that she would leave her apartment to her. She had even drawn up a will with a notary. The institute struck Christine with its enormity, disproportionately huge, as it seemed to her, halls and recreations, numerous passages with a large number of doors. Then she realized that in the evening there were almost no people here, and during the day there was probably no place for an apple to fall. Christine had a hard time finding the right classroom and sat down to wait for the end of the retake. Several students, waiting for their turn, were hanging around the corridor, running to the toilets to smoke or sitting, staring at their textbooks, intending at the last moment to digest the unlearned material. One of the textbooks was lying on the chairs in front of the office door. Christina picked it up and began leafing through it. She had come a little early, and it looked like she was going to be here for a long time. It turned out to be a volume on human anatomy from the university course. The girl read one paragraph, then another. She was so engrossed in reading that she almost forgot why she was here. The material was broader than in the school textbook. And soon Christine came across a chapter on the physiological features of pregnancy. Here she came across a term she had never heard before and had never even suspected that such a thing existed: surrogacy. It turned out that it is possible to bear and give birth to a child whose biological material belongs to other people. That is, the primary fertilization of the egg is done in a test tube, and then a viable embryo is inserted into the uterus of a woman who is carrying essentially someone else's child. This fact struck Christina so much that she put the textbook aside and thought deeply. Why is such a thing even necessary? She took the book again and found out that the procedure is carried out at the request of a childless woman who is unable to conceive and bear a child. Christina, who had long ago decided that she did not need children, too much responsibility, and it is not part of her life plans, began to ponder, does anyone really want to have a child so much that people agree to such complicated procedures? Well, let's say about a woman who agrees to be a surrogate mother. For what reasons? Out of her naivety. She did not know the answer to this question, could not think of anything, and decided, as always, to use the library internet the other day. The students had dispersed. Someone took the abandoned textbook, and Christina quietly slipped into the classroom and found herself face to face with an elderly, austere-looking woman who was collecting books and notebooks in a bag. "Good evening. I'm from Natalie Phillips. My name is Christine," she said. She replied tiredly, rubbing her temple. "Why are you so late?" "I was waiting for your test to be over," she said. "I should have come in. While they were writing, we could have talked to you," the woman said, a little annoyed. "That's okay. I'll come back another time." Christina turned to leave. But Ellie Gavin stopped her. Wait, how quick are you? Let's go to the cafeteria on the first floor. It's open till 9:0 for employees. At least I'll have a coffee. My head is already cast iron." After drinking coffee, the woman really revived and now looked at Christina favorably. "So you are my Natalie's favorite. So tell me." "There's not much to tell," Christine shrugged. "Natalie Phillips insisted that I come to you. I've always liked biology, that's all. I was thinking about where to go. Now I've decided to go to Pittsburgh." "Wow." Ellie raised her eyebrows. "Just like that, Pittsburgh?" "Yes," Christina nodded. "I have distant relatives there." "So, what do you like about biology? What section, what field?" the professor asked a little mockingly. Well, Christina laughed. "In fact, I didn't really have any special priorities until tonight, when I read a section in someone's textbook about the physiology of pregnant women." "Oh yeah." Ellie was surprised again. "What was it that interested you so much?" She didn't notice how she automatically called Christine you, as she always did to students. "Surrogacy," she replied with a twinkle in her eye. "It's so exciting." "I agree," Ellie nodded. Well, I have a contact. A fellow student works in the Department of Medical Pathology at the University of Pittsburgh. He deals with just such questions and has already written many scientific papers. Christina texted him. He might hire you as a lab tech, but you'd have to take the internal exam on a regular basis. They have their own competition besides Forbes. Did you take any other exams besides the compulsory ones? Just chemistry and biology. Christina smiled. 80 and 82 test scores, respectively. Did Ellie Gavins put on her glasses and looked at her interlocutor with new attention. That's a perfect score. In that case, you're eligible for the budget? I don't have any other option. Christine smiled a little ironically again. Thank you for your help. I will keep you informed and give Natalie the contacts. Ellie nodded goodbye. And so it was that Christina ended up in Pittsburgh after all. She went straight from the train station to the man Ally had recommended her to, and he really took her in and listened to her. Where are you staying? He asked her at the end of a long conversation, which included a small exam of her major subjects and a tour of the laboratory where Christine was to work. Nowhere yet, Christina said. Did she come to you right away? You see, the professor, whose name was Oliver Johnson, took off his glasses and put them on the table next to him without the big thick lenses. His eyes immediately became large and the fluffy long lashes and childishly naive. So it became obvious that this man, who was not old yet, was terribly intelligent and decent. You see, Christine, he said again, obviously choosing his words carefully. I hope you won't think me impolite and strange, but Ellie has told me a little about you. So I know about your predicament. Christine was silent, looking at him carefully and calmly, not understanding what he was getting at. Once again, Oliver Johnson repeated, trying to get to the point. I have a cottage not far from the city. It's very convenient to get there by train. The station is very near. Not so long ago, a man lived there, a good acquaintance of mine. Yes, he kept a little watch over the house, you see. I'm a very busy man and lonely. My parents died. G.I. Scene's interlocutor was sweating from the mental effort. So, would you agree? Not for free, of course. He raised his index finger and shook it in the air, as if he were affirming his own. Would you agree to live a little at this dacha? It's very cozy. It has all the necessary amenities. I'm sure you'll like it. He looked at her pleadingly, as if it were not Christina who was an orphan with nowhere to go, but he himself who had asked her for this favor. The girl burst into an unnecessary and now inappropriate laughter. This adult and important man looked comical, asking her to stay at his dacha as some incredibly important favor. Christine could hardly suppress her silly impulse and left only a polite smile on her. Oh, I would be very grateful to you for this opportunity. Really, rejoiced the professor. Of course, the drive is quite far. It would take about an hour to get to the laboratory, but it's very beautiful and not at all scary. Security, a barrier in the village. Everything is as it should be. Don't be afraid, please. You're not afraid, are you? No, Christina assured him. Still ready. Oliver Johnson laughed. Beautiful, beautiful. The professor put his glasses back on the bridge of his nose and turned back into an important and unapproachable big man. Please have a good time sometime tonight. And at 8 o'clock, you and I will take my car to the place, and I will show you everything. I'm very glad it's all worked out so well. You can have lunch now in the university cafeteria, and I'll make sure you get a pass. And tomorrow your pass will be ready, and you'll be free to roam the grounds. You'll be back to work the day after tomorrow or the day after that. How do I get a job? It's not urgent. Finally, Christina managed to slip out of the office where this conversation took place, and she literally folded in half from the fit of laughter that overtook her. To think that, through such a human chain of acquaintance, she had found a place for herself in the world. Christine felt a deep gratitude to Natalie Phillips as head of the staff and to the professor under whose supervision she would soon work and in whose house she would live. For the first week in her new workplace, all she did was wash lab dishes. The endless flasks, test tubes, and cups had to be disinfected in special solutions for each variety. Then washed with regular detergent, dried in a heat-resistant cabinet, and finally sanitized and dried again. There was a lot of work, but Christina even liked this monotonous work. She liked the atmosphere of the laboratory, where smart people worked in a friendly team, solving important problems and moving forward science. Here they put experiments, described the process and results, filled journals and computer databases. Several large laboratory departments occupied an entire wing of the Research Institute building. In the same building was a university that trained future scientists. Christina hoped to enter the biology department there next fall. In the meantime, she diligently delved into the intricacies of the new life. The salary in the laboratory was small, but she did not need much. She didn't pay a dime for housing. Her landlord and boss, Oliver Johnson, also paid her utilities. Moreover, he transferred money to her for looking after the house, although Christine refused to take it. Then he started transferring them to her card, and it was inconvenient to return them. Christina ate little, eating cheap lunches at the university canteen. There was always free coffee or tea in the laboratory. The staff was always bringing something, and the refrigerator was bursting with supplies. Christine also started baking baked goods and giving them to everyone. At Oliver Johnson's house, she occupied the smallest guest room. She used the kitchen, downstairs bathroom, and washing machine, but cleaned everywhere once a week. She enjoyed cleaning this big empty house. She liked the smell of tidy rooms and the opportunity to be of use to her kind employer. She had to get up early, but she was used to it. The railroad station was not far away, and Christine liked the sound of trains, especially at night. She worked officially until 6 p.m., but sometimes stayed late in the evenings and on weekends. It was possible to walk around the legendary Pittsburgh. This city amazed Christina. It seemed that every building and stone could tell something. She loved everything here, but never for a second did she forget her main goal. In her months in the city, she'd learned the identity and activities of her enemy, Denson, through the press, word of mouth, and the internet. But how to get close to him, she had no idea. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. The laboratory where Christine worked, including the treatment of infertility. A group of scientists led by Oliver Johnson used advanced methods and enjoyed authority in scientific circles. Therefore, it was here that a couple who had been trying unsuccessfully to have a child for many years came to Christina. All their attempts had failed. Numerous pregnancies ended in miscarriages. And now, when both were already over 40, the hope of giving birth to a baby naturally and completely dried up. Important people are coming to see us today, Lucy Wasserman, the head of the department where Christina worked, told her girls in confidence. Oliver Johnson from the city hall warned them not to talk. It's like doctor-patient confidentiality, total confidentiality. I see. We won't look at the house at all, not even a glimpse. Not on purpose, the female employees assured the boss. Well, that's good, she smiled. Now let's get to work. Christina wisely remained silent. She was generally silent most of the time, but she always did her work well and on time. Therefore, quite rightly earned a reputation in the laboratory as an employee neat, diligent, and able to keep her mouth shut. In the middle of that day, about an hour after lunch, Lucy Wasserman called the girl into her office. Christina, have a seat. I've been asked to speak to you by Oliver Johnson. I'm listening, Christina replied calmly. Our laboratory is currently being assigned a new task. You will remember, of course, one of the important areas of our research related to the viability of human eggs. The girl nodded. So, Lucy continued, now we are presented with a rare opportunity to continue experimenting with the biomaterial of a particular individual. Is that possible? Christina raised an eyebrow slightly, who was quite surprised by this turn of events. Let's just say that in some cases, yes, the supervisor looked at her young employee. But everything that happens within these walls has to stay here. Do you understand me, Christina? Absolutely, the girl echoed. Good. Lucy Wasserman, satisfied with the progress of the conversation, rubbed her hands together. In that case, I'm officially informing you that you, Christina, will assign to Oliver Johnson's department as a senior lab technician from this day forward. You start tomorrow. Now go to Human Resources. You will need to sign the paperwork. Okay, Christina stood up and walked out. She wasn't particularly surprised by the new assignment, as she was well aware that she was the most suitable person for it. Single and completely dependent on the lab management. Where could one find a more ideal person for this top-secret research? However, she had no idea what lay ahead of her and what new challenges fate had in store for her. Ninsura, Bright, surprisingly bright for a Pittsburgh winter sun. New office, new position. Christina sits at her new desk and spreads out her work supplies, creating her own order. Christina, did you get this handed to you? The receptionist places a simple cardboard folder on her desk. Oliver Johnson said to familiarize yourself with it. Okay, thank you, Christina nodded, calmly opening the folder. She read the introduction about the medical procedures that would be performed as part of the scientific study and turned the page. Saw the card of the patient whose biological material was being submitted for the study. Tiffany Ellison, 46 years old, 9 pregnancies, all ended in spontaneous abortion in the first trimester, 6 in vitro fertilization attempts in a hospital setting. Clinical pregnancy was not diagnosed in any case. There were no pathologies of the patient's reproductive system. Christina closed the folder and thought. Her thoughts were racing feverishly and in complete disorder, jumping from 5th to 10th. She was in a state of extreme mental agitation and could not think of anything else but the chance that fate had presented to her. Christine had no doubt that this woman was exactly who she thought she was. In the marital status column, her husband's name and title were listed. In addition, in the next section, he himself, Eugene Maxwell, 48, was also listed as a patient participating in a research and scientific experiment. A patient providing his biological material, and she, Christine, the daughter of the parents who suffered at his hand, sitting here at this table, has access to all the classified information and will soon be directly involved in the whole process. What is this, if not a gift of fate, an opportunity to settle accounts with her enemies? But how? How exactly? It is necessary to think of something and quickly. Suddenly, the girl realized the most important. Dickinson could easily recognize her. Not by her appearance, of course, but by her surname. It is unlikely that he had already forgotten about his crime and about the man whom he had ordered to destroy together with his wife. What to do? Summarily, thought Christine, and found no better option but to change the surname. However, it was impossible to do it urgently. And then it is necessary to somehow explain to his management such a spontaneous decision. However, it is necessary to first find out everything properly. Gritting her heart, she approached Oliver Johnson at the end of the day. "Can I see you?" Christina Dmitrieva asked. "Come in, please," he smiled. "What is your question?" "I wanted to know about the stages of our upcoming work in the experiment." "Yes, I'm listening to you." He put his hands on the table and looked at her intently. "How long before we get to the direct work with the patients?" "Well, how shall I put it?" Oliver Johnson leaned back in his chair. "It will depend on the progress of the primary research. Perhaps even more likely, it will take several months." "Good," the girl nodded. "And if I understand correctly, the ultimate goal for our patients is a new cycle of IVF attempts." "In principle, yes," nodded the professor. "Only using viable eggs modified in the course of our experiments. But I admit, based on the available data, I do not consider this option acceptable." "Why not?" "Well, you see, the patient's body can hardly handle the strain of pregnancy. You've probably already looked at the chart and seen how many chronic diseases there are, haven't you?" "Yes," said Christina. "But then what is the only way out? Surrogacy." "Exactly so," smiled the professor. "I see that you're not wasting time. That's very commendable." "Thank you for the clarification." Christina stood up. "This is exactly what I needed to understand the nature of our work. One more thing, Oliver Johnson. I think I should make you aware of my impending change of name. We shall soon have the pleasure of congratulating you." Raised his eyebrows at the professor. "No," Christina smiled. She guessed that he meant marriage. "My marital status will not change. Only I want to change my surname because the current one reminds me too much of the tragedy that happened in my family." "Oh, of course, I understand." The professor frowned slightly. "I sincerely apologize. It's okay. Time heals." And Christina tilted her head slightly, saying goodbye, and left the office. She went to her room, made a strong espresso from the coffee machine, and thought again. So she should have enough time to change her last name. Now she would have to devise some plan to get close to the Dickinson family to gain their trust, so that one day, when she had succeeded in completely confusing the enemy with her network of cunning intrigue, She could look him in the eye before she destroyed him and tell him whose daughter she was. That's when she will finally avenge her parents' deaths. Eugene Didinson, a large official, was actually miserable financially. He had everything one could wish for. Social status too, of course. But there was no real family in his life. He hadn't loved his wife for a long time. And in the last few years, he had felt a real disgust for her. Endless, unsuccessful attempts to have a child had turned her, once a beautiful, cheerful, desirable woman, into a real tortured, slovenly, and restless. Constantly preoccupied with how to maintain her hopelessly fading femininity, Tiffany Illison had been a gorgeous woman in her youth, a former model. And Eugene was immensely proud of his wife. When they were in society, all the men saw her with envious glances, and it flattered his ego. At first, he and she did not even think of having a child. Wanted to first achieve a position in society, firmly stand on their feet. And then it turned out that it is too late, and nothing works. We started going to doctors, taking tests. We had to endure a lot of not the most pleasant procedures. In the course of all this medical torture, Eugene inadvertently learned about his wife, Tiffany's, long-standing abortions, which she had done before she met him. He was completely angry, blaming her for everything, and now he couldn't even bear to see her anymore, haggard, downcast, desperate to make up for lost time and again, forcing him to undergo humiliating examinations and biomaterials. Of course, Eugene had as many mistresses as he wanted. He still looked pretty good himself, exercised regularly, played tennis and soccer on the city hall team, and was an inviolable object of female attention. But what he desperately wanted was not just a one-time pleasure, but a normal family to which he wanted to return after work, to his own children, not adopted offspring. Tiffany repeatedly suggested and asked him almost on his knees to take a child from the orphanage and raise it as his own. "No, don't even think about it," he answered her categorically. "Never in my life I will not bring up someone else's child. Who knows what will grow out of him? Who were his parents? What is his heredity? I want my own child, period." "But what if we can't have one of our own?" Tiffany asked in desperation. "Then I'll find someone else to be the mother of my children," her husband yelled angrily. "A normal, healthy woman who hadn't had an abortion when she was young." "Oh, is that so?" Tiffany was mortally offended. "So now it's all my fault?" "Yeah, who else would it be? Certainly not me. If I were you, I'd think twice before looking for other candidates." "What do you mean?" Eugene was indignant. "Are you threatening me?" "Call it what you want. But if I find out something like that, I want you to know that I'll have a statement from you the same day, describing all your dark deeds. God, who sees everything, doesn't give you children because you're a monster. You orphaned someone else's little girl and killed her parents." "I'll get you." Eugene swung at her in a heartbeat, but never followed through on his threats because he knew his wife was capable of what she was saying. Besides, she was the beneficiary of a huge amount of his assets: houses, apartments, offshore accounts, several companies. They were tightly bound, and only death could break that bond. More and more often, Eugene thought, how good would it be to get rid of her, this hated woman? He would then be free again, and have a new, young, healthy woman who would bear him healthy children. But apparently Tiffany sensed his terrible thoughts and was careful to keep herself safe. They practically didn't live together anymore, but she didn't give him a divorce either, although he had offered her that easy option more than once. "No, why would you think of that?" She said, grinning evilly. "You cannot get rid of me so easily. Don't even think about it. The statement is already written, you know. And if anything happens, my lawyer will take it to court, and I'm sure it'll be on your down." She's hired security, and getting close to her without publicity has been a problem. And he didn't need the press coverage. Eugene was wary of Tiffany's other threats, knowing full well that she could carry them out, as it appeared that even from the other side of the world, she would not let him live in peace. And all the time she was lecturing him about how much he'd had enough of her, how she'd fallen into her stupid religion. Damn it. As if the usual neuroses wasn't enough, she was poisoning Eugene's life to the fullest, and for the first time, he couldn't make up his mind to do anything. And yet, in this gloomy fog, a ray of hope suddenly shone through. One of the usual days she called him, and he grimaced as he picked up the phone. "Hello, it's me," she said sharply, without preamble. Tiffany and Eugene had arranged to meet. Why? To talk about their breakup options. "I think I've found a way out that works for both of us," Tiffany said. "You do? Eugene was interested. Well, look, what if this is another one of your tricks? No, Tiffany said calmly. No tricks. I'm being honest. Come on, we can't discuss these things in public. They agreed on a time to meet, and that evening he drove to her apartment. His wife was in an unexpectedly good mood, carefully dressed and combed her hair. And in general, she looked pretty good. Please, come in, sit down, she invited him, smiling. What will you have to drink? Please, Tiffany, let's get to the point. Eugene said grudgingly. No, of course. She nodded understandingly. Then I'll have a drink. Tiffany had already had some drink and continued. Don't worry. I've really come to the conclusion that we're better off apart. Hallelujah. Eugene jokingly threw his hands up in the air. What made you think of such an amazingly clever idea? No. Don't be sarcastic, Tiffany said. I don't care about your jokes. Listen to me carefully. I'll divorce you, but only after you've done me one last favor. Then, I'm all ears, said Eugene, putting his foot on his leg and pouring himself some of the liquor from the decanter. I intend to try one last time to have a baby, Tiffany said calmly. And I need your fresh biomaterial. She clarified, anticipating his objection that he had already given her enough of his material, which was stored frozen. The thing is, Tiffany continued, I was recommended by a research institute here in Pittsburgh that does experimental research in this area. In short, they do something to the eggs that makes them act. I suppose Eugene agreed. What if it doesn't work this time? Are you going to say I owe you something again? No, Tiffany shook her head. If it doesn't work out, we'll still get a divorce. It's okay. And if it works out? Eugene asked a new question. Then I'll finally have a baby that you promised not to claim, Eugene smirked. Then why do I have to go through all this trouble? To get rid of me? Relax, Tiffany said. Can you start a new family? You don't have a problem with that? But you can use any donor material, can't you? Eugene wondered. Why do you need me? Now you know, Tiffany sighed. You don't want to raise someone else's child. You've said so yourself 100 times. Didn't you? Well, I don't want to take any chances either. Who knows what kind of heredity these donors have? At least I know you. She laughed ironically. Yeah, Eugene shook his head. You know, there's something in that, don't you? I'll think about it. But you realize you'll have to sign the papers. I need a guarantee. Of course you do, Tiffany nodded. So do I. That's why I'm consulting with my lawyers. And I've already prepared everything on my end. Here you go. She handed him a folder. No, what is it? Eugene asked, taking his time to look through the documents. It's a draft agreement between you and me about everything we just discussed. It's about divorce and child rearing. If it works out, show it to your lawyers, and then we'll meet to make the necessary changes. No, okay, Eugene said, standing up and picking up the folder. See you later. A month and a half later, Christina received her new papers, took her mother's maiden name, and was now Arkeson. Sorry, Daddy. She said to her father's pictures. It won't be long, I promise. Hopefully, it won't be long before I can get justice and then reclaim our shared last name. In the lab, meanwhile, research, tests, and experiments were in full swing. Christine had seen Tiffany Diddenson several times already, coming in for treatments, but never her husband. She hadn't asked Oliver Johnson anything, thinking it unnecessary, and rightly judged that he would soon appear. She was patient and kept repeating to herself that it would have been much worse if their first meeting had taken place before her last name had been changed. Christine was right, and one morning, entering the treatment room, she found a middle-aged man, simply but elegantly dressed. He was standing in a pensive mood in front of the door of the biomaterial stall. Well, at last, he exclaimed, turning to her. Did you bring it? Let's hurry up. Brought what? Christina was surprised, and immediately she recognized him. The blood rushed to her face, and she realized at the same time that he meant the plastic container. Obviously, some unfortunate mistake had been made. Gathering all her courage, the girl smiles. So the employee with the container will be right with you. I just came to pick up some forms. Too bad, Eugene smiled. I wouldn't have minded the presence of such a pretty girl. He winked at her. Christina grinned. She felt like she was ready to leap at him like a ravenous panther right now and tear him to shreds. But instead, she just smiled politely back, carefully pretending not to take the hint. She turned, took the forms, and left the office. Once in the hallway, she leaned back against the cold painted wall and covered her face with the palm of her hand, forcing herself to steady her breathing. "Christina, what are you doing?" Susan, who was passing by, was carrying the same unfortunate container. "I don't know." Christine raised her head, something in her eyes darkening subtly. "I slept badly today. My blood pressure is very low. Go get some coffee." Susan nodded. Christine peeled away from the wall and indeed followed the good advice. Her mind cleared a little, and she began to berate herself for her stupid behavior. "I should have played along with him," she thought, "and what a fool I am. When will I get the chance now?" When she realized it, she promptly made another cup of espresso and dashed toward the treatment room. She sat down by the office, clutching the hot cup without even noticing how it was burning her fingers, and waited for her luck. The wait wasn't long, and the coffee didn't have time to get cold. A minute later, the door creaked open and let Eugene out. "I apologize," Christine smiled dazzlingly at him. "I came to make it up to you, and I brought you some coffee." "Thank you," he was pleasantly surprised. "But what was your fault?" "I should have been more courteous," Christina replied, feigning remorse. "Will you forgive me?" He smiled cheerfully. "Or say, if you agree to dine with me tonight." Christina pretended as if she were going over her schedule in her mind. Nothing was more important to her than this meeting. "I guess so," she smiled. "Great. Then I'll pick you up at 7, Eugene said. "Just tell me where." "I'll be here at work," Christine smiled. "I live way out of town, so I don't want to have to drive back and forth." "I see," he nodded. "Well, I'll see you tonight then," and went down the corridor, every now and then looking back at the strange and attractive girl, who smiled at him, embarrassed and blushing so sweetly. Yes, that's exactly the kind of girl I need, Eugene thought. Simple and sweet and direct and not spoiled, so I can be sure of my paternity. Their first date was exactly as Christine had imagined at an expensive restaurant. On the table is a bouquet of fresh white roses. Muted, pleasant music is playing. He is telling her something funny and entertaining. In his mind, she sits, smiles at him, responds sometimes inappropriately. She drinks small sips of white wine and strains all her inner resources not to jump up and break this heavy vase with delicate roses on its head. But every trial has an end. This awful rendezvous was over, and Christina, accompanied by her Emmy, went outside, where the north wind was blowing shrill and wet. "It's nice out today," Eugene smiled, lifting the collar of his expensive woolen coat. "Where can I drop you?" "To the train," said Christina. "It's a long way for me, and you don't want to go any farther back." "Worry." Eugene laughed. "What worry is that?" "The driver will take you. He's got a job." Her companion persisted. "Just to the train. I'll take you from there. My parents are very strict, you know." "Oh, then, of course," Eugene Maxwell looked at the girl appraisingly. Was she really as innocent as she seemed? That would be lucky. Somehow Christine herself did not realize how she had managed to capture his attention. She, of course, did not know about his marital discord, but soon he himself, heated by drink and her exciting company, told her about his problems, and the girl memorized the information and decided that it would all be very useful to her. And she said to him, "As I understand you, it's terribly unfair when a feeling goes away and a person has to pull and pull everything. Is your relationship dangerous?" "Exactly," Eugene exclaimed. "About the bed, you are very right in what you say." By then, they'd already switched to you, though Christine still wouldn't allow him anything but gentle handshakes, and planned not to for a long time to come, maintaining the image she created. Meanwhile, back at the lab, things were not going well with patient Tiffany Didinson. After several attempts, it was possible to obtain viable eggs and even fertilize them, but the resulting embryo still didn't take root in the woman's body. "What to say, finally, Oliver Johnson? The only thing left for us to do is to find a suitable surrogate," he said. Tiffany dropped her shoulders sorrowfully and cried, "Don't, please don't." The professor hated all tears and sentimentality. "Christina, may I see you?" He called out from the adjoining office to his assistant. "Please, Christina, explain to our patient all the intricacies of the surrogacy method." and he was quite pleased that he managed to avoid further heartwarming conversation with a nervous mommy. "Here, take this." Christine gave the crying woman a clean, sterile tissue and waited for her to calm down. She felt a little sorry for the young lady, but she didn't forget for a second that she was the wife of her sworn enemy. "I'll explain everything to you now." The girl turned on the big screen and put the right slides in the projector. "Watch, your embryo will develop in another woman's body, but genetically it will remain exactly yours. It will be as if the egg was not nurtured by a hen, but it matured in an incubator, to put it crudely. Do you understand me?" Yes, Tiffany nodded. "I know you do, but I'd still like to do it myself." "But it's not like you're losing anything," Christina reassured her. "No problems with carrying, pregnancy, childbirth. All of that will be taken care of by another woman who will just be an incubator. And the genetic material will be yours and your husband's. And the baby that will be born will be 100 yours. He will not take anything from the surrogate mother's body except for the necessary nutrition for growth and development. Unfortunately, to date, science does not have incubators that could ensure the cultivation of embryos to full development. So all you have to do is find a suitable surrogate." "Yes," Tiffany nodded, wiping away her tears. "You explain everything so perfectly." "Christina," the girl smiled. "At your service, Christina." Tiffany looked at her studyingly. "And you tell me yourself." She finally made up her mind and asked directly, "Would you be interested in being a surrogate for our child?" So the girl marveled. Such a scenario had not occurred to her at all. "Well, yes," Tiffany nodded calmly, a feverish light in her eyes. "You'll get a fee that will allow you to support yourself and your family for the rest of your life." But Christina didn't even find something to answer right away. "But I didn't think." "And you think hard," Tiffany said. She stood up and walked closer. "I promise you that you won't regret it if you accept. But where am I going to find a surrogate now? Judge for yourself. And then I've read how often it ends up with these artificial mothers not giving the children back to their legal parents. I'm absolutely not going to risk that kind of risk. And you, girl, are smart and understand everything so well. You certainly won't be taking a child who is genetically unrelated to you." Christina, still in shock, could only nod. Tiffany took the gesture as agreement and exclaimed happily, "That's great. I knew you could be trusted. Our attorneys will prepare all the paperwork. I really wish this would be over sooner. I assure you, my dear, you will not regret your decision. You will never regret it." She smiled encouragingly, stroked the shocked girl on the shoulder and left the office. And Christina was left with her mouth open at this turn of events. "What are you garden variety head?" Clever Johnson, to whom she briefly, blushing and stammering, outlined what had happened half an hour after the patient left, laughed heartily. "It's simply impossible, I assure you. First of all, you're not the right age. By law, a surrogate must be at least 20 years old. Secondly, she must have at least one healthy child of her own. That's it, and the delusional fantasies of our overly impressionable patient should not bother you. But calm down," he added, seeing Christine nervously tearing a paper napkin into small shreds. "We've already had impressive results with her eggs. Whether these embryos will take root or not is not that important to us. We now have material for many years to come. You could write hundreds of articles, publish a report on your experiments, and your contribution will undoubtedly be highly valued by the admissions committee. I shall intercede for you myself, my dear." "Thank you," barely squeezed out Christina, who no longer knew what to think. That same evening she told Eugene about the offer his wife had made. "Really?" He laughed. "So she's got a crush on you too?" Apparently so. Christina exhaled and drank an entire glass of wine in a gulp, something that had never happened to her before. "Forget it," Eugene said nonchalantly. That's a silly woman. She doesn't know what she's talking about." But nonsense. The woman had no intention of backing down. After meeting with her husband, she categorically demanded that Christina Arkhipova be the surrogate mother for their child. "Why would you do that?" shouted Eugene, furious. "There are plenty of other women around, and anyone will give birth with just a finger. Remember, Christina is right for me for several reasons." Tiffany calmly answered him and smiled wickedly, looking him straight in the eye. "First of all, she's your new date, isn't she?" "Oh my God." Eugene rolled his eyes. "How did you know? You're not the only one with eyes and ears everywhere." Tiffany said triumphantly. And secondly, she understands the process very well, explained it all to me herself. Didn't you think she might say no? Eugene blustered. Why would she refuse? His wife asked, out of great love for you. She laughed ironically. Open your eyes. She's only with you for money. Did you really imagine that such a shabby subject could attract the attention of such a young lady? Before your position and money, you're nothing but a pittance. A zero without a stick, Tiffany raged. Well, he rose threateningly from his chair, but the woman beat him to it, raising her hand warningly with her cell phone. One tap and my security will be here immediately. Do you need any extra witnesses? No. Then calm down and hear me out to the end. Eugene sighed heavily and sat back down. Okay then, Tiffany rubbed her temples thoughtfully. I want this girl to carry our baby. I don't know if you've already slept with her or not, and I don't care about that. Before the procedure, the doctor will still check to see if she's already pregnant. I suggest you take it slow and slow down. Otherwise, I'm out of the game. And don't forget the agreement, she said threateningly. Eugene snickered again, glaring angrily at her. Calm down, Tiffany grinned. You're going to get some too. For one thing, it could very well turn out to be a multiple pregnancy. At that point, we'll split the babies fairly, and after that, we'll go our separate ways. And if there's only one baby, it's mine. She'll have more children for you, the woman laughed bitterly. You keep forgetting that we're talking about a living person, Eugene said angrily. And if she refuses, it's your job to convince her, Tiffany said triumphantly. That would be my guarantee that she wouldn't take my baby. Because if it was any other woman, even you and all your money couldn't stop it, But not even me. But this is different. It's not just my baby, it's your freedom. So it's either that or nothing. This conversation is over. Eugene was ready to kill her. But instead, all he had to do was clench his teeth tighter and nod his head in agreement. Hell, he'd convince anyone and anything to get rid of his bed and his wife once and for all. Now, however, there was a serious conversation to be had with Christine. Eugene thought long and hard about how to approach the matter carefully and gently, how to convince her to agree. But when they finally met to talk, this strange and mysterious girl surprised. Eugene, I wanted to tell you, she began hesitantly. Your wife has offered me to be a surrogate for your child. Yes, I know. He nodded, certain that an ugly scene like the ones he was so familiar with at Tiffany's mercy was about to ensue. And while he was agonizing over his choice of words, Christina continued. So I decided that I would do it. He stared at her dumbfounded, unable to believe what he'd heard, and only managed to squeeze out the wrong thing to say. Me. No, to free you from this hateful marriage that prevents us from being together, Christina said to him affectionately. Yes, my girl, Eugene said numbly. Then realized she felt that way about him. So Tiffany had been completely wrong, and she'd said that Christine only wanted money from him. His self-esteem skyrocketed, and now he was willing to do anything for this sweet girl. Oh my God, you have no idea how much you're going to help me with this. But there are some complications. Christina frowned slightly. And you'll have to help me. Talk. He looked at her with adoration. I'll need a new passport with a date of birth 2 years older and the birth certificate of my first child. The law is such that it mandates these conditions for a potential surrogate. We'll do it, rejoiced Eugene, who had expected the girl to start making conditions for herself, asking for money, property, and the like. But this saint, as it seemed to him, only wanted to help. You will not treat me worse after all that has happened, will you? She asked him hopefully. No, God be with you. Of course not. He put his arms around her and kissed her tenderly on the cheek. I'll have you as the Virgin Mary, for you are. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Each us six. I am innocent in terms of intimacy, Christina told him calmly. Take care of yourself for your future husband. Do you think this pregnancy will count? She laughed. No, for me, no way. Eugene looked at her with shining eyes. Christina, my favorite. Oh, and one more thing. He realized. You better move to the city, closer to the hospital, to a doctor's office. You never know. And by the way, what about your parents? I'll tell my parents that I'm going to study in New York with a clear conscience, Christina lied. They are my people simple. They do not need to know everything. Right? That's right, Eugene approved her eagerly. The fewer people who know, the better. I'll find you a fancy apartment. I'll always be there for you, and you'll have the best daily care. Oh my God. He was so moved, he even brushed away a tear. Rejoice, rejoice. Christina thought to herself, smiling gently at him. Let's see how you sing when everything is in my hands. She had already made her grandiose plans of communication and was not going to deviate from it one iota. From the lab, she had to leave temporarily. Christina wrote an application for a leave of absence at her own expense. Personally listened to the HHs and HAs of colleagues about her decision. Long lectures, Oliver Johnson, on the fact that very unpleasant procedures in 9 months of her life is not worth any money, and did everything in its own way. At last the decisive day had come. The day in which she would hold the fates of the 2 men who had once taken her parents' lives in her hands. She wasn't sure about Tiffany, but that she knew and was covering for her husband. Christine didn't doubt it one bit. He himself had hinted to her that he couldn't get a divorce so easily because she was blackmailing him with an old story. Christina, how's it going in there? He asked the female employee who had come to perform the procedure, peeking into the changing stall. Christina, who was just getting into her hospital clothes, smiled. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. You're not worried at all. Annie, with whom they had more or less become friends during their work together, asked her sympathetically. But no, that wasn't the right word. Christina wasn't going to be friends with anyone here at all. Why should I be worried? I'm in good hands. Laughed the girl, wanting to translate everything into a joke. In half an hour, everything was finished, and Christine was taken to the ward, where she had to spend several hours in a horizontal position. After that, it was safe to leave and spend time as usual. The examination that would show whether the embryos had taken root would be in a week's time. If there is no result, then a repeat in another 3 days. If not even then it would be all over again. Christina was very hopeful that her young and healthy body would accept the tiny lives at once. Yes, she had been implanted with 2 viable human embryos at once. This is often done, increasing the chances that at least one of them will take root. Eugene and Tiffany greeted her in the room with a huge bouquet of roses. They looked like a happily married couple, and if you didn't know better, you'd think they were. There's our mommy, Tiffany said happily. But how are you, sweetie? All is well? Christina smiled at her. I feel great. God willing. God willing. Tiffany closed her eyes and mumbled a prayer. Eugene looked at her and hid a disgruntled face. All right, outsiders out. Another staff member entered the room. Christine needs rest and quiet now. Let's go, let's go. The Didinson couple obediently responded. See you soon, Christina. Thank you. Christine thanked the woman sincerely. They have already pumped my brain with their families, she said to the employee. You signed up for this yourself. The woman shook her head. Now you have to put up with it. Yes, but everything must be in moderation. The girl grinned. I didn't sign up to listen to them around the clock. I'll give birth and let them do what they want. Wouldn't it be a pity to give it to them? The woman doubted. After all, 9 months, under the heart to carry a child. Yes, but not mine, Christina said sharply. That's it. I want to rest. I got it. The employee went out and closed the door behind her. Christina sighed, leaned back on the pillows, and closed her eyes. It seemed to her that she could almost physically feel 2 tiny living beings, hostile to her, trying their best to take root inside her. And yet she sincerely hoped they would succeed. They kept her in the room until morning because her temperature had risen slightly. It happens. She was reassured by the doctor who performed the procedure. It's normal in principle, but we need to keep you under observation just in case. Christine didn't mind. She didn't care where she spent her time, here or in the new, comfortable apartment that Didinson had rented for her. The apartment was in a new apartment complex, almost in the center of Pittsburgh, with a gorgeous view of one of the many She was to live there until she gave birth. However, Christina was not going to waste time. She enrolled in a training course at the university. Now the girl was studying textbooks, preparing for future enrollment. That first night spent in the hospital room, Christine had a strange dream, as if she was standing in a dark corridor. All around was emptiness, but a faint light was shining in the distance. In that light, she saw 2 beings. They came closer, holding hands. Christine realized that they were 2 small children, a boy and a girl. In her dream, she had even seen their faces. But after waking up, she remembered almost nothing, only vague, blurred images. She it seemed to the girl that something had changed. She put her hand on her stomach and listened to the sensations. Suddenly, she felt a faint tremor as if a small vein were pulsing. Of course, at this early stage, no amount of probing would tell her anything. But Christine believed that everything had gone well and a new life had taken hold inside her. A follow-up examination, an ultrasound, confirmed her confidence. Both embryos had taken root. The Dedensons were overjoyed. Christina was literally showered with gifts. Her new apartment was littered with bouquets, packages, and boxes in beautiful packaging. The refrigerator was bursting with delicacies, but the girl did not want anything. Even strange, because pregnant women usually want something, don't they? But apparently, it's not time yet, Christina decided and went into the study of pathological anatomy. Class was interrupted by a phone call. Christine annoyingly reached for her smartphone, thinking it was Eugene. But another name popped up on the screen, Natalie Phillips. The girl rejoiced. "How are you?" "I'm fine," the familiar voice replied. Where did you disappear to? You haven't called or written for a week." "I don't have time because of work," Christina said. "But everything is fine. I'm studying anatomy and preparing for admission." "I'm happy for you." Natalie's voice sounded a little anxious. "I had a strange dream today. It was silly even." Christine remained silent, not speaking. Natalie continued. "It was like you had twins, can you imagine?" Maybe someday, she laughed to hide her surprise. How could she feel it? But right now, I don't have time for children. All right, Natalie was clearly relieved to hear that her favorite was doing well. "So you're okay? Don't worry, please." "I'll say goodbye then. Don't disappear. Call me sometime." "Okay, honey, of course. I'm so sorry." Christine hung up. The conversation had left her with an unpleasant residue. She decided it was time for the next stage of her plan, to text Eugene asking for a meeting. He flew in 20 minutes later, as if he'd been waiting for it. "How's my favorite girl in the world?" Eugene hugged and kissed Christina. She had to put up with all this, but the circumstances were fortunate. She wouldn't have to put up with more intimate contact. She was willing to do even that, just to get her way. "It's all right, don't worry." Christine looked at him with all the tenderness she could muster. "Eugene, we need to talk about this. Both babies are likely to be born safely. At least I hope so." "Of course they will." He interrupted her and kissed her palms. "You are my gift of fate." "Wait," Christina gently pulled away. "But I would like one of these children to stay with me. Do you understand? You agreed with Tiffany that she would take only one, didn't you?" "Yes," Eugene was glowing with happiness. "And the other one will be ours, my dear. That's exactly what we're talking about." Christina talked to a lawyer. Legally, she can have both of them. "You and I need to keep our baby safe," Christina said with a concerned face, playing up the anxiety to keep me calm. "Do you understand what you want? Just tell me. I'll do everything. We need to prepare the papers for your divorce with her in advance and at the same time about our marriage with you, so that she will sign them as soon as the children are born. And we too, so that we can get married right away. Okay?" Chuckles, and most importantly, we have to bribe the doctors to tell her that the second child is dead. "Why?" Eugene wondered. "So that she's guaranteed to have only one. Don't you understand?" Christina looked at Eugene with concern and bewilderment that he really didn't get it. She, too, needed a guarantee that she could influence him, and for that she needed his own child. By the way, do you want a son or a daughter?" She asked him cheerfully, to lighten the mood a little. For son, he smiled dreamily like a boy. "An heir." "Somehow I think they're of different sexes," Christina told him. Then it's settled. Talk to the doctors beforehand. Don't show her ours and don't tell her he's alive." All right, said Eugene. "You're so thoughtful." The time of the birth came without a hitch. Close to her due date, Christine was very swollen. Her huge belly was half a minute before she entered the room. If she walked through the door, the babies felt great, and their surrogate mother had a sore back, swollen feet, and dizziness for all of the last 3 months. So she was admitted to a hospital room. "There is no danger for the children yet," the doctor said during the checkups. "But you may develop preeclampsia on the background of hydrocele. Therefore, we will do a planned cesarean." "Okay." agreed Christina. I don't care. Do what's best for the babies. She continued to maintain her rainbow image, and Eugene and Tiffany sat next to her, smiling contentedly. The contractions started a week ahead of schedule, and they had to do an emergency C-section rather than a planned one. Christine had a high fever, and while the doctors tried to bring it down, she was in terrible pain. Finally, she was taken to the operating room and anesthesia was given. There was the first baby cry, then another. The voices of the midwives merged into a ragged hum. Christina was given a shot in her vein and she passed out. Where am I? What about the babies? She said weakly as she regained consciousness. It's all right, Eugene was beside her. He squeezed her hand lightly. But, unfortunately, one didn't survive. Wow. Christina rose so swiftly that she almost ripped out the wires and tubes. Just then she saw Tiffany beside her and remembered their agreement. It's such a shame, the woman wiped away her tears. But at least one is alive. One of my girls, my sunshine. Thank you for her, Christina. Do you want to see her? No, Christina said. I don't want to. You should, Tiffany agreed hastily. I'm going to go. Get well soon. Wait, what about the papers? Christina said worriedly. It's okay, Eugene winked at her faintly. We've already signed everything. Good, Christine sighed with relief, and then she jumped up. But we also have to now. He squeezed her hand reassuringly and lowered his voice. Take your time. Let her go. At the same time, the room door behind Tiffany slammed shut, and Christina said demandingly, have them bring the paperwork and our son. Eugene took out his cell phone and called someone. 10 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit came in and pulled sheets from a folder. Please, that was the marriage certificate that Christina and Eugene signed, and the baby's birth certificate so she could see it with her own eyes. What are we going to name him? The happy father asked. Christina shrugged. Whatever you want. Any name will suit me. Let's go with Daniel then, Eugene said, smiling. Daniel. Christina, stunned, not yet fully recovered from the surgery. The name reminded her of her murdered father. Yes, in honor of my grandfather, important name, Eugene said. It's short for Danny, and that's what we'll call him. Bring it to me, Christina asked. I'm now a legal wife with the last name Didnson. I want to see my wrinkle baby. A red face tightly spun into a cocoon. It didn't elicit any tender feelings from her as she'd expected. My son, my heir. He exclaimed, my son, my heir. He exclaimed, turning the bundle now and then. Where is he going? How handsome you are, how healthy. Okay, I want to get some sleep. Christina stopped him, calming down. Mommy said she wants to rest. But let's go. The newly minted dad turned to the infant. Finally alone, Christina tiredly closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. The first 2 weeks after the birth were very difficult. The stitches were sore. The tests were bad, but she bravely endured everything. In addition, she constantly had to put the baby to the breast. But Christina did not do anything that the nurses recommended on purpose, and the milk burned out. She got mastitis and was put on antibiotics. She survived this too, with a heavy heart and thinking only about one thing: how she could be discharged as soon as possible and feel strong and free again. And that long-awaited day came. Her stitches were removed, and she and the baby were discharged. Happy Eugene took them not to the apartment where Christine lived before the birth, but to his luxurious country mansion on the shores of Lake Erie. A few more weeks passed quietly. She rested and walked, and the baby was taken care of by numerous nannies. Christina didn't have to do anything, as he was on artificial feeding for a tick. A couple of times a day, she took him in her arms just to look at him in front of Eugene. And all the while, she waited agonizingly for one crucial event to happen, and she did. One warm spring day, a cavalcade of police cars with flashing lights lined up outside the Didson mansion. With sirens blaring, they pulled up, and the whole quiet neighborhood was filled with that piercing howl. What the hell? Her husband looked irritably out the second-story windows. Did something happen to the neighbors? But within minutes, the cops were not at the neighbor's house, but in their yard. Spread out, Didson security, Eugene Maxwell. A man in civilian clothes announced in a metallic voice, stepping onto the shiny parquet floor in dirty streets. What's the matter exactly? Eugene answered him angrily. Don't you know who I am? I do, nodded the man. You don't know who I am. Allow me to introduce myself. Special Investigator Anthony Samuels of the SID. You are charged with the premeditated murder of Daniel Williams and Mary Alexanders. You can call your lawyer. Anything you say can be used against you. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Eugene shrieked and turned around and said to his young wife standing nearby, "Honey, this is some kind of misunderstanding. Don't worry. Please don't worry. I'll sort it out and be back soon." "Okay," Christina nodded calmly. "I'll be waiting for you." The man with his hands cuffed behind him was led to the police car and seated behind the bars in the back. The cavalcade drove off with a howl of sirens, deafening the entire cottage community. "Don't worry. It might still be all right," one of the nannies said timidly to Christina as she watched the scene from the window. "It won't be all right," Christina turned to her, and the woman gasped in horror. The eyes of the landlady glowed with wild fury, and there was a broad, joyous smile on her face. Eugene Denison was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment in a high-security colony. This was taken care of course, by his young fake wife. After their first meeting, she went to the prosecutor's office and the investigation department, demanding a new investigation into her parents' deaths. Several attempts ended in failure. Nobody wanted to listen to the girl, but she did not give up and came again and again demanding justice. Finally, one of the investigators, a young, handsome guy, got into the situation and agreed to talk to her. Christina told him everything honestly about herself, about Denison's heinous crime, and about how he had paid off the investigation then, many years ago. "Understand, Christina, I am entirely on your side," this fellow investigator told her then. "But it's not like we don't have any single piece of evidence of his guilt, which means there's no reason to return the case from the archives for a new investigation." "Will there be evidence?" the girl said calmly. "Only give me a deadline." A few months later, she brought him a tape of a conversation between herself and her new husband, Denison Eugene Maxwell. On the tape, she could clearly be heard asking what it was that ex-wife Tiffany was blackmailing him with. "Yeah, there was a case," Eugene replied with a laugh. "10 years ago, in one town, I had to get rid of a small and brash competitor. It was his own fault. He just kept getting in the way. They explained it to him once, but he didn't get it the second time." "Where's that statement now?" Then the special people took him down. "Aren't you afraid?" Tiffany kept threatening him with her statement. "Come on, I'm not Allegedly, a fool, she wrote it's it been sitting and in gave my it to safe a lawyer for a long with time. all the Gave details it to to her her in in exchange for the baby along with the divorce papers. That's it." During the new investigation, the statement was removed from the safe, and Tiffany herself was brought in as a witness and then as an accomplice to the crime. What would happen to Tiffany proved that she knew of the impending atrocity, but did nothing to report it to law enforcement and the murder of her parents. She was given a little Denison had finally received the punishment she answered the prosecutor's question was standing on the stand beside Eugene. This is circumstance for the prosecution present how he would child meeting this previous modest girl and so had given him his long-awaited the deaths of my Traeger parents, Daniel and Mary, barely spoke, who were brutally blown up in the automobile on his cruel orders. Christina only grinned contentedly in response to his words, she added, and walked out of the hall with her head held proudly high. "Your son will go to the orphanage where a few months later Denison Eugene was found dead in his prison cell. He had committed suicide. Tiffany Denison, after serving her probation, left town somewhere with her infant daughter. Little Daniel Denison was placed in an orphanage in the state where he spent the first few years of his life. Christina once again changed her last name, now permanently, to her father's, and she received a new passport. She successfully entered the university at the chosen faculty and studied perfectly and with pleasure. Most of Denison's huge fortune was confiscated, but what was left was more than enough for a secure life. Christine bought herself an apartment and put the rest of the money in the bank at a good interest rate for such a large capital, and everything seemed to be fine. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to, but at times she was attacked by an unreasonable longing, a vague feeling of anxiety, restlessness. What it was, she didn't understand for a long time, until one day she came across a small obituary in the city news column. Tiffany Ellison Denison, formerly of City Hall, had passed away prematurely after a long illness. The following summarized the woman's accomplishments and the milestones of her life's journey. Christina wondered. A few days later, she made inquiries and found out that Tiffany and Eugene's young daughter had also been placed in an orphanage. Some confusion formed in her soul. After this news, she decided to go on vacation to her hometown to unwind and visit Natalie Phillips. The first night in that tiny kitchen, Christine cried and told her kind teacher everything that had happened to her in the distant northern city. Then they sat without sleep for a long, long time until morning, talking, drinking strong tea, crying, and talking again. 2 weeks later, in one of the orphanages in the Leningrad region, a small, withdrawn boy was brought by a disgruntled teacher into a room where a pretty young woman was already waiting for him. "Hello, my friend," affectionately said to him this unfamiliar aunt. "Do you know who I am?" The boy shook his head sullenly. "I'm your mother." She smiled at him. "I was lost, and now I'm found. Forgive me, son." "Mommy." The boy shrieked and threw himself on her neck. "Mom, I knew you'd come." "That's right, so I came back for you." She hugged the boy and lifted him in her arms. "Now come on, let's go. We still have to pick up your little sister." Christine, having drawn up all the necessary papers, became the official mother of 2 little orphans who were born thanks to her, although they were not her biological children. Somehow, unbeknownst to her, she managed to love the children of her sworn enemy as her own, and became a caring and dear mother to them. In addition, they have a grandmother, Natalie Phillips, who moved to live with her only real family. Emily opened her eyes. She felt the dirt under her fingernails in the cold, damp earth. The sensations came into her mind, not all at once, but one at a time, as if there were a narrow door that only one at a time could slip through. Emily grimaced in pain as a bright light shone in her face. It came and went. It was a terrible headache. That was the second thing she felt. Then the girl realized that she was terribly cold, so much so that she could barely feel her own body. The thought shook her so much that Emily tried to get up. She looked around, birds cawing, dirt, cold, earth, and grass with huge crosses everywhere. Realizing that she was in a cemetery, she began to breathe frequently. Panic set in. For a while, Emily couldn't even remember her own name. Then she realized who she was, but she didn't know where or why. She looked around and realized she was at the grave of her late husband. He had died only 2 years ago, but the memory of it hurt her every time. He had an ordinary grave, a black fence, a monument with a photograph, simple gray, no frills. Behind the monument was a wooden cross. Emily sighed. At least something made sense. Suddenly her gaze fell on the knoll of earth next to Michael's grave. He hadn't been here before. Who was buried so close to her husband? She looked closer and saw herself in the picture. It was impossible to make out the image in detail in the dark, but she remembered this picture of herself well. It was on her profile on all of her social media accounts. Lowering her gaze, Emily saw her name, Emily Johnson. With fear, the girl began to gulp air with her mouth. At that moment, she heard some noise very close by. When she saw 2 short silhouettes right behind her, she flinched and started to crawl back. Her short black hair was disheveled. She was wearing a black dress, no shoes, just black socks on her feet stained with dirt. "Don't be afraid of me," the boy behind her with the flashlight said quietly and calmly. He was the one shining the light into her eyes. A large dog sat next to him. "Who are you? Why am I here?" Emily asked fearfully. Her voice was weak and trembling. Nausea began to set in, and a severe pain appeared in her head. Panic was building. "I don't know. Buddy and I came here. My friend Grandpa Frank used to work here in the cemetery. He used to let me take all sorts of goodies from the graves. People leave them. And he said they put candy for people like me. I'd eat them, and some dead relative of theirs would smile in heaven, just like that." His words didn't make it any clearer. Emily looked apprehensively at the huge dog. It was acting friendly, wagging its tail and looking at the boy. He looked to be about 12 years old, blonde, a little overweight, with slanted blue eyes and rosy cheeks. He wore a yellow jacket and a black hat. The jacket was a little small for him. "I don't understand," Emily said. "I told you Uncle Frank let me take candy, but that's from the graves. And today I came in and they told me he was gone, that he was sick and couldn't work anymore. He's been replaced by his replacement. He's angry and drinks. He wanted to send me away, but I tricked him, pretended to leave, and came back. Grandpa Frank showed me a long time ago where there's a crawl space on the north side. Me and my buddy went in and started collecting candy, and he heard you. I didn't realize it at first, and he started digging your grave. I couldn't pull him away. He's digging at me like a real builder, what he's talking about, and I started to help him. It turned out you were buried shallow. The coffin was open and right on the surface. Grandpa Frank told me all the dead people are buried 2 meters deep. It was right next to here when a friend dug up a little bit of your grave. I heard you standing there too, realized you were alive and opened the coffin lid. It wasn't boarded up. How should it be? Emily was horrified. Who buried her? Why? It was hardly an accident. If the coffin hadn't even been pinned up properly and buried deep. How are you not afraid to walk around here alone and dig up groupies, she asked. I'm used to the cemetery by now. Grandpa Frank used to say you shouldn't be afraid of the dead. You should be afraid of the living. But I haven't seen the living dead yet. Of course, yeah, Emily rose to her feet. Her whole body shook with cold. When I opened the coffin, you started climbing out right away. That's when I got a little scared. It was creepy. And then you lay there for a long time, like an hour. Come with me. I live nearby. I'll warm you up with tea. Just be quiet. My stepfather won't let me bring anyone. Emily nodded. She had nowhere else to go. She followed the boy, her friend running beside her, wagging his tail happily. Her rescuer's name was Bobby. His mom had died 7 years ago. He didn't even remember her. He was already living with his stepdad. He was a very bossy man. He'd fix anything, help anyone, but he drank a lot. Sent the kid out to pick up alcohol from graves. That's how Bobby became friends with the caretaker. Grandpa Frank taught the kid to be sneaky, saying they don't let him in the cemetery with alcohol now. They only let you keep candy. That's what the boy did to keep his stepfather from drinking. But of course, it didn't help much. They lived badly, poorly. Since he was little, Bobby was able to wash and iron and cook for himself, and also fed his stepfather from childhood. The boy had no childhood. Emily learned all this in the short time it took them to walk to his private little house. The cemetery was far outside of town. She'd been there often since her husband's death, but after a year she'd been less frequent. She needed to let him go and learn to move on. Emily promised herself to go there no more than 3 times a year, on Michael's birthday, the date of his death, and her wedding anniversary. For the past year, she dutifully kept her promise, and she wasn't supposed to be here until March of the following year, but somehow she'd managed to die on November 8th. How that had come about was a mystery. Her memory gave out information about the last days of her life selectively, in fragments. She couldn't remember the last events, but she didn't want to go back to the city to her apartment yet. There was little chance that she had been mistaken for dead, so she thought. Then she would be given a proper burial. Emily sat in the outhouse where Bobby had brought her, drinking hot tea. The boy wrapped himself in a blanket and sat beside her. A friend she often wiped his paws on before letting him indoors. This child was overly responsible for his years. I saw in a movie that a certain uncle was killed, and to avoid confessing to the crime, they buried him. Maybe that's what happened to you too, Bobby suggested. He was sitting close by. There was a dim light bulb on in the outhouse, and it was warm, but not warm enough to take off his jacket. On the wall hung photographs and Bobby's childhood drawings. In the corner was the usual garland of colorful bulbs. No, I'm buried next to my husband. He died 2 years ago. So whoever buried me knew where my husband was buried, Emily thought. Michael sighed heavily. The boy settled on the mat on the floor. Won't your stepfather come in here? Emily asked. No, he's drunk again. You don't have to wait for him tonight. He'll wake up for lunch, sore, yelling at me, just like he always does. The neighbors have already called social services. I lived in an orphanage for 6 months, but he made a deal with someone. He took me back. He needs the child benefits that pay for me, and when he drinks, he says I look like my mom and he loves me. Except he doesn't care about me. He did when I was little, but not well. I was often sick. Neighbors nursed me back to health. Grandma Tisha lived across the wall from us. She's dead now. But she used to consider me her grandson. Helped my father raise me. She told me a little bit about my mom. When my grandmother died, I was 9. And then I became an adult and independent. I can be responsible for myself now. I still have a little bit left. I want to grow up soon, Bobby said. Emily smiled. She wanted to say, don't be in a hurry to grow up. Childhood is wonderful, but adulthood is full of challenges and worries, but that wasn't the case with Bobby. He had already grown up, but he hadn't grown up yet. He had had a difficult childhood, and adulthood was bound to make up for it. It should give him a loving, caring wife, children, friends, and he should never have to fight against the world alone, picking candy from graves and listening to his drunken stepfather. Emily sighed, looking at the boy. Time will fly by quickly. You'll see, she told him, and smiled. They talked for about an hour. Bobby was an extremely talkative young man and very bright. As she talked to him, her memory began to come back to her. She looked at the chubby cheeks of the boy with the beautiful blue eyes, and scraps of the last day flashed before her mind's eye. She remembered Jessica and the fact that she had tried to help her. Emily and Jessica had been best friends since college. They had bonded and quickly found common ground, being 2 against all odds, trusted each other unconditionally. When Emily met Michael, Jessica was jealous, but found it in herself to be happy for her friend, as she usually was. Their meetings became infrequent. They were replaced by the daily routine of married life. Emily was happy. She was glowing. The only sad part was that she and Michael never got to have children. When he died, Emily turned gray with grief, trying to take her own life. Jessica got there just in time, supported her friend the whole time, and they became close again. 2 days ago, Jessica had to drop her off at a fortune teller she knew for the second time. "It's been a year. You still haven't recovered," Jessica was saying. "Is that all normal?" "No, not normal," her friend argued. "You need to say goodbye to your husband and move on with your life." This woman can talk to the dead. It's not like a cheap TV show. She really connects with them, sometimes giving people details that only their deceased loved ones could know about. Charges a lot for her services, but only if she manages to contact the person. She says not everything is in the public domain. Some people are allowed to talk to her, and others are forbidden. "You know, it's awfully interesting. I was in contact with her myself when my grandfather died. She calmed me down and told me that he said hello and asked me not to get into his gear, to wipe the fishing rods clean of dust, and rather fish like he did. She said he is with his grandmother now, and they are arguing again. Said his whole family is there, and he is happy to see me and know there is no death and no eternal separation. I looked at the world differently after that." "Oh, nonsense," Emily replied dejectedly. "But you're just torturing yourself with guilt. You can't do that. So you had a fight. Who doesn't? How can you beat yourself up like that?" The day before Michael died, Emily was jealous of him. She'd long thought he was hiding something. Dark, she became suspicious. She found an outgoing text message on his phone to an unknown number. "You too, of course," she thought some woman had texted Michael saying she loved him, and he erased her message and so replied, only he didn't have time to delete his own reply. She saw it. Michael claimed that the number belonged to his coworker, his boss, and congratulated him on the fact that the bonus would be at the end of the month. And he wrote "you too" to congratulate her, because she would be getting a bonus for overtime. Emily wouldn't make a big deal out of nothing, but this was not the first time she felt he was cheating on her. Every time there was some excuse, and she couldn't prove anything. She thought she was going crazy with jealousy, blamed herself. But that night she couldn't help herself. She tried to push Michael. He got angry, yelled at her, and left. They had a motorboat. They lived near the river. The boat was later found wrecked, and he was reported missing. But they said, "Dead don't get your hopes up." Emily stopped living when Michael was gone. She stopped believing in God and the devil. She lived out of inertia just because she had to live. She came from a wealthy family. She didn't need money. She hired a psychologist and worked with him, but not for long. He kept making her cry, reminiscing, hurting her, and she just stopped going to his sessions. 2 days ago, Jessica picked Emily up, and after work, they got in her car. They drove out of town. The same fortune teller was going to tell them something important about her husband. The first session Jessica had dragged her friend to hadn't gone very smoothly. It was over a week ago. The elderly grandmother with the piercing brown eyes said that Michael was angry. He hadn't forgiven Emily and was asking her to explain herself. Emily didn't know how to respond. He said so. "Not me," the fortune teller excused herself. Jessica paid for the session. It had been her idea. Emily refused to go. "He was harsh on me too." That day, Michael could just calm down, explain. "If that text wasn't for a mistress, then why did he refuse to call that number in front of me? I know his coworker. I would have recognized her voice. I've had my suspicions for a long time, and with his death, they haven't gone away. It's only gotten worse. We had a very bad breakup." Emily started crying. Michael said, "You had no right to be jealous." Emily sensed something was wrong. Michael was always reconciling after a fight. She was sure that if he hadn't died in the motorboat accident, they would have reconciled and forgotten all about it. She even considered not to forgive him at first. The quarrel was not good, left a residue, and suspicions had long tormented her. She wanted clarity. She wanted to know the truth, to believe, but she couldn't. The last thing she remembered. Jessica talked her into going to that fortune teller again. She didn't want to because she'd left her in tears last time. "We should go. She won't take any money. She says Michael didn't tell her everything, that he's keeping her awake and making her contact you. Let's go. It's free. What have you got to lose? If you don't believe me, don't believe me. Let's just hear her out and go. And put it behind us. And maybe you'll feel better after what she said." Emily agreed. She got into the car with her friend. What happened next was hazy. Jessica gave Emily some salted peanuts. Half an hour later, she was thirsty. "I have a thermos of tea lying in the back seat." "Yeah, sure," Jessica tossed over her shoulder. She was focused on the road. Emily decided to take a sip from the thermos. One, another, a third. It tastes weird. What is it? She asked. Kazakhstani tea. Very good, healthy, some kind of herbs. That's all I could remember. After that tea, there was a complete memory lapse. It was as if she hadn't even realized how she'd blacked out. One thing became clear. Jessica couldn't have had anything to do with her fake funeral. What's on your mind all of a sudden? Bobby asked. The boy had been staring at her in silence for several minutes now. Emily shook her hair. The black dye was visibly disheveled. It was creepy for her to be in a black funeral dress, but needing to figure out what had happened. I remembered everything she said slowly. Remembered what? What? Emily told the boy the events of the last few days. She spoke simply so as not to offend him with her silence. After all, he was the one who had dug her out with his dog and brought her in warmly and gave her tea. Emily was still coming around. The drowsiness and weakness in her body had only gotten worse. You just don't go back there. What if that Jessica wanted to kill you? Yeah, she miscalculated. Maybe she planted arsenic. Emily shuddered. She felt sick, like she'd been poisoned. Could it be true? But the thought of her best friend wishing her harm seemed unbearable to Emily. Her thin fingers encompassed the mug of tea. My head hurt. I didn't even know if I'd have to go back anyway. I wasn't dead. And it's not clear what's left in the cemetery. I'll pick it up tomorrow, and no one will notice. Are you moving it here? I'll go inside. He might wake up. He'll fight again. The last time I was outside, the social services came to see him. He gave me such a beating. I said I'd be home before dark. I hope he's still asleep. Bobby went inside, saying he'd be home in the morning. He left the dog on the doorstep. The dog had been taught commands and obeyed his little master without question, and Bobby never left his friend hungry. Even at the worst times, he found a treat for him in the trash cans, and for himself, too. During the night, the memories that her psyche must have separated from her mind for a while came flooding back. If she had just slept in unconsciousness until her release, it wouldn't have been so bad yet. But Emily began to remember waking up in the coffin. She was nauseous. The lack of oxygen was pressing in her head. A slight fear gripped her entire being. All night long, those memories made her shudder with terror. There was nothing more terrifying than a death like this. Emily's parents had died years ago. She had been an orphan, and Jessica had been the nearest and dearest person to her for a long time. Could she have done this to her? Or was it an accident? But then why did they bury her so ridiculously, superficially? There were too many oddities in all this. It couldn't have been an accident. In the morning, she heard her stepfather yelling at Bobby she wanted to stand up for him, but she cried most of the night. And she felt terrible when the yelling stopped. Bobby came into the outhouse with his dog. I brought you some waffles. Do you want some? He asked. Emily shook her head. She would have to go to the hospital, get checked out, find out, at the very least, what had caused her death and why in heaven there had been a cancellation. Thank you. I'll be coming back. I have my own apartment in the city after all. I have somewhere to go. What if someone lives there now, one of the people who wanted to kill you? Let me go and find out. I'll ask the neighbors. I'll tell them you helped me before, and no one will suspect a thing. Will you at least know how you died and who buried you? Emily shrugged. She explained to Bobby how to find her apartment. Only I don't have the money to even get you a ride. Yeah, well, they put you in the coffin without a wallet. But don't worry. I'm harebrained, he smiled. What if you get caught? Bobby squinted slyly. I have a conductor I know who doesn't charge me. Always gives me a treat, too. I was walking my dog once, and a dog jumped him. And my dog protected him, chased the dog away. We've been friends ever since. He showed me to everyone on the route. So I get a free ride into town, and from there, too. Wow, Emily marveled. Wait a minute, you don't go. If anyone comes, Hyde said Bobby. Okay, Emily nodded. She was feeling sleepy. Bobby was saying basically the right things, reasoning like an adult. She wanted to trust someone right now. She slept in the outhouse for 2 hours before she jumped up at the rumbling. Who the hell are you? A huge, bearded man loomed over her. Emily realized it was Bobby's stepfather. Hello, my name is Emily. She threw back the blanket and staggered to her feet. The man saw her face in the light and started to stagger back. And that's you. You, Emily didn't understand. His face didn't look familiar to her. I'm sorry, Bobby let me hang around. I'll be leaving soon. It's just that I'm in trouble. You can't be alive. Emily thought the man had white fever. He reeked of alcohol. I'm going to leave right now. Let me go." The boy's stepfather stood in the doorway, his whole demeanor making it clear he wouldn't let go. His gaze was crazed, fear and something else in it. Something evil. Emily saw a stick on the floor and grabbed it. She swung it at the man, but he didn't bat an eyebrow. "Let go or I'll hit you. I want to leave. I didn't take anything from you. I was just cold. Let me go," I'll scream. She began to choke with panic. The man took a step towards her. Emily tried to hit him, but he snatched the stick, threw it away, and hugged the girl. She thought he was going to molest her, but he only cried. "What's the matter with you? Let me go." "Emily, honey, is that you? Tell me it's you. I've been so sick without you." Emily raised her face to him and looked into his eyes. "I don't know you." "And you haven't lost your memory?" he asked, looking at her hopefully. He still had his arm around her. "No, you have me confused with someone else." "Now, wait." He stepped out and locked her inside. Emily decided she had to get out, but the door to the outhouse was locked very firmly and the window had bars. She couldn't get out. Soon the man came back. "You're sorry, okay? Don't be afraid of me, I'm not crazy. Here, look at this." He held out a picture to her. Emily recognized herself in it. Except she'd never had that haircut, never had those clothes, and she'd never been to the place where the photo had been taken. "Who's that?" "That's you, isn't it? Look at it. It's not like I'm crazy." Emily stared at the picture for a long time. "Yeah, it's really weird. She looks a lot alike." "She doesn't look like her. She's a copy. The mole on her cheek, look. Is there such a coincidence? You have a voice like hers, too." I loved her. Emily was Bobby's mother. She's dead. A long time ago. This is the only picture I have of her. I didn't give it to Bobby so he wouldn't play Beria as a memory. "My name's John, by the way." "You're Emily." My head hurt like hell. Still nauseous, but intermittently thirsty. She told John about who she was, where she was born and raised. She was 17 when her parents died. Her uncle had looked after her for 6 months until she came of age, then left for Poland, where he was from. The rich heiress was left all alone, not knowing what to do with her parents' inheritance. She decided to study, and she went where she could enter herself and did not tell anyone that she had $1 million in her accounts. Even Jessica didn't know for a while, and when she found out, she said that she respected her decision to dispose of her parents' fortune wisely, not rashly. She'd never been jealous, never asked for a loan. They were friends, ignoring the fact that Emily could afford anything. And Jessica had a hard time getting everything, she said, and how she ended up in the cemetery. John only remarked that her friend was probably in on it, and Bobby could really help. He's very outgoing and can get information from even a scout. John, on the other hand, told her about Amy. "When I met her, she already had Bobby. I fell in love, got coded and didn't drink until the day she died. You know, if you're Amy's sister, I'd like you to take Bobby. He's your nephew after all." And out Emily raised her eyebrows. Sister, nephew. She suddenly realized that she wasn't just talking about a girl who looked like her. For some reason that thought didn't immediately occur to her, but really because the birthmark was in the same place. "So maybe a sister then. So Bobby's maybe related to me." "Yeah, you're right. We need to figure this out. If that's the case, I'll take him. But only on the condition that you hang in there and live a normal life," Emily mouthed. John invited Emily into the house. She stepped inside. It was cleaned up. Only the table was left with traces of last night's libations. "You must be sick, huh? You've been poisoned, you pale thing. You're like a greaseball. You should go to the hospital for a checkup once in a while. Do you vomit all the time? I'll pour you some brine and you'll be fine." The bearded man opened the refrigerator. Inside was a lonely pot, half a loaf of bread. I could see why the boy was going to the graves. "Let me make some soup. Do you know how sure I can do anything?" There was a chicken leg in the freezer. The only thing missing was an onion, but the soup was good without it. Emily put in more carrots. When Bobby returned, there was a hot first course waiting for him. He was surprised that Emily got along with his stepfather. He hadn't told him about the fact that the guest might be his mother's sister. The boy had only seen the picture a couple times, so he didn't catch the resemblance himself. "I brought you a newspaper." "Take it, read it. It's on page 5. I couldn't find out anything else. Evil people live in your rich neighborhood. They wouldn't even let me in the front door. But the neighbor said a friend of mine lives in my apartment. I signed it over to her. It's an inheritance." I opened the paper. There was an obituary with my picture on it. The cause of death was a heart attack, and at 30 years old. That's highly questionable. I had a lot of things to figure out. I've probably never had so much uncertainty in my life. and Emily felt alive in the soup. Bobby dozed off, content, satisfied. She had sworn to herself when she left their house that she would come back for the boy, even if he was nothing to her. But she needed to figure out what had happened. Emily made her way to the city, walked to her apartment. John gave her Iris's old jacket that had been hanging in their closet for years. She couldn't bear to throw it away. Emily felt so strong in that jacket, like her sister was holding her hand. Standing at the door of Emily's apartment, I threw off my jacket. She rang the doorbell. When Jessica opened it for her, appearing on the doorstep in her robe and her favorite doggy slippers, not standing in front of her in a black funeral dress and staring menacingly into her eyes, Jessica pressed her hand to her lips. "Oh my God, it's you, you're that question again." I've heard that somewhere before. Emily's mind raced.
You poisoned me? And took my money for yourself? What kind of Emily didn't have time to finish the swear word that was begging to come out because Jessica started crying? I didn't do anything. I mean, I did, but I was hypnotized. Remember that fortune teller? She turned out to be a con artist. I didn't realize what I was doing. She compelled me, compelled you to sign over everything I owned to herself, forge signatures.
Emily asked. Jessica sounded sincere. I've been trying all day today to remember what was in that thermos. She was the one who gave it to me. I didn't want to. I realize now what I've done, and it makes me feel so nasty. Emily, honey, I'm sorry. I was hypnotized. Do you have to believe me? Emily walked into her apartment. Jessica cried as she told how the fortune teller looked her in the eye, how she taught her what to do. She said that after Emily passed out, Jessica had taken her to the cemetery and asked to bury her. The caretaker was greedy for money. He reeked of alcohol. Jessica gave him a good sum of money, and he said it would be done in the best way. He drove himself to the funeral parlor to pick up the coffin. She was afraid to stay there, so she just left her friend without even waiting for the funeral. She was still alive when they put her in the coffin, but apparently she was too lazy to dig deep, especially since the money was weighing on her pocket. I was very thirsty. They buried her in the spot Jessica had indicated. Then she put an ad in the local paper, just to clear her conscience. And that was it. Body buried. Paperwork's forged. What I don't understand is why the fortune teller made you sign it over to yourself. What's in it for her? She had to come to me to give me half of the fortune. That's what she said. I waited for her. She made me believe that I owed her, that it had to be this way, you know? I'm terrified myself. Her hypnosis is getting weaker now. I guess it's because I saw you. I'm so glad you're alive. Jessica suddenly grabbed her jacket from the coat rack and tried to walk to the door. At that moment, the police officers entered. Going far, Lady Emily stopped by the station with her story and told the story to the investigator. He was extremely surprised, sympathized with her, and told her to go home, hide from the criminal, and wait for the operatives. Jessica was arrested, so it was the fortune teller. But at the interrogation, it quickly became clear that the fortune teller first heard about all this. However, she told another funny story. Jessica had paid her to make Emily feel guilty. And I knew right away that the man was alive, she said. Jessica found another way out. Blamed it on Michael. Turns out Emily's ex-husband wasn't dead. The boat accident was faked. He'd been living in the city and dating Jessica the whole time. He had huge debts, which is why he decided to fake his suicide. He and Jessica had been having an affair for a long time. She was terribly jealous of her friend and decided to steal away the man she loved. Jessica wondered why some people get everything and others nothing. So she decided to even the score somehow. She helped Michael fake a suicide, and his debts turned out to be Emily's problem. She was surprised. She didn't know anything about the debts, but she paid them. She wanted to leave only good things in her loved one's memory. You pulled me out of the noose, Emily said bitterly. I was wrong to show weakness. I regretted it so much later. Michael came back to life quietly and inherited everything. But you were alive and whining all the time about how much he loved you and how you loved him. And the truth was, he didn't love you. Michael was always mine. You didn't get everything. Her best friend's words horrified Emily. How jealous she must have been of her all this time, to the point of poisoning her and burying her alive. But the worst part was that Michael was an accomplice. He helped carry Emily's body out when she had already taken the poison. When she found out, she couldn't help but cry. It was painful, cold, lonely. There was no one she could trust. The police assured her that Jessica and Michael would get real jail time for what they'd done. Emily hired a good lawyer. She was scared. She wanted these people to stay where they couldn't hurt her for a long time. The newspapers were full of headlines. Risen heiress punishes her killers. Emily agreed to be interviewed by one publication. The others hyped their versions. It was funny to read. But all her thoughts now were not about what had happened, but about what she had learned. To check the twin sister version, Emily went to a specialist. and he made some inquiries. Were you adopted, Emily Igorevna? It's true. Your parents went to the clinic several times. Your mother had a unique operation for those years. But the result was the same. Multiple failures of our research institute. She was in despair and even took medication for depression. Whenever she saw a woman with a stroller on the street, she burst into tears. That's when they took you in. You were born on the same day as your twin sister. Her name, as you know, was Iris Janovna, was an exact replica of you in appearance, but grew up in a poor family. Why me? How could my parents separate the twins? Why didn't they give her away? Emily asked. The truth turned out to be painful. Twins are always born early with less weight. You were more affected. You were much weaker than your sister, malnourished, slow to gain weight. When your mom was discharged, she signed a waiver on one of her daughters, and the doctors already had an order for a baby, a girl. Your adoptive parents wanted a daughter. You grew up in a wealthier, more prosperous family, became a rich heiress, and are still alive. I think your adoption was the best thing that could have happened to you. Your sister was less fortunate. Iris was drinking, in treatment for addiction, all at the age of 16. You're 17. She got clean. She got pregnant. Her parents were dead by then. Bobby, Iris's son, was born at 40 weeks, healthy. She was living a normal life too. She died of a coincidence. She got sick. She started it. An infection set in, came into a crowded hospital. There was no one to help. Her roommate John took care of the baby. She'd given birth to him by another man, from whom we could not find out, but at the alleged time of conception, she worked in a wealthy family as a cleaner. Emily, having received the address of that place, went there in person to find out as much as she could about her late sister. It was getting dark. It was snowing. She parked outside the huge 2-story cottage and approached the gate. It was unlocked. Once inside, Emily walked in high heels across the carved paving stones to the door. She rang the bell. Inside, she heard birds singing. Soon an elderly woman opened the door. You? Is that you? It can't be. Emily's mind raced again. She realized that she had now been mistaken for her deceased sister. Why not? It can. But you're dead. That's what they told me. Jesus, the woman turned pale before her eyes. The life seemed to be coming out of her at that very moment. Just then, a gray-haired, statuesque man with a beautiful and even tan showed up behind her. My goodness, what do you want here? You've robbed us and come to our doorstep after all these years. What? Are you getting shameful? Emily shook her head. That's it. That's enough. I'm not who you think I am. My name is Emily. I'm Iris's twin sister who used to work for you, and I've come to learn the truth about my sister and my nephew. Iris has a child, but she wasn't pregnant when she worked here. Come in. God, you look just like her, the man lamented. His name was Edward Paul Gray, and his wife's name was Anastasia Victoria Gray. The house was beautiful, but uncomfortable, as if it were fashionable. It was more like a museum than a place to live. There were pictures everywhere of a handsome, dark-haired man, apparently their son. I was so scared. I'm still not comfortable, Anastasia Victoria said. Why were you scared? Michael squinted. Yes, Anastasia. Did you think Iris had come back to steal something again? Her husband looked at her with disbelief and incomprehension. She sighed. Okay, I'll tell it like it is. This secret is weighing on me. Too heavy a burden. I can't carry it anymore. Your sister worked for us, and she didn't steal anything. I'm the one who talked to her. But I wasn't going to go to the police. I just needed her to leave our son Eli alone. He's too trusting. She twisted him around and started lying about being pregnant. No offense, but your sister wasn't a very nice person. Michael was hurt by her words. He felt there was something wrong with this story. You talk bad about my sister, and she's not a very nice person. Was she pregnant? Edward Paul frowned. She lied to me. I'm sure she did. And I took action, threatened her that if she told Eli about the baby, I'd put her in jail. The baby would be taken away from her. She didn't like the idea. Of course, she shut up and left. Have you been to her place, gone to see her? My husband asked me. Yes, my conscience was bothering me. I wanted to see what the child looked like. But they told me that Iris was dead and her son was living with his father. So I was right. All she wanted was a stranger's baby to tie our Eli to her. We're wealthy. Her family is, I'm sorry, penniless. And Eli is infertile. That was recently discovered. Really, since he was young, Edward added. Yes, he's married now, but they don't have children. So I did the right thing. Michael stood up. I'll bring Iris's son over here, and you can look at him. If that kid in the picture is your kid, they do look alike. Bobby's living with his stepfather now. He took Iris in with his son, but he's not his father. Michael walked away, leaving the door open behind him. He was annoyed at the way these people were talking about his sister. How could this woman know whose child Iris was carrying? Already at the gate, Emily ran into a man, the same man who was in all the pictures in the house. "Hello," Emily said. The man was stunned. A tear rolled down his cheek from his eye. "It's you. It's you. I've been looking for you. They told me you were gone." Oh my God. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly against him that her breath caught. "I'm sorry, Eli," Emily began. She realized that she had called him by his name, that she was speaking to him in her voice, and it wasn't helping her explain her. "Where on earth have you been? Why did my friend say you were buried in the town cemetery? I never dared to find the grave. Apparently you weren't there. Well, it happens. And the date of birth matches," Michael said. "No, she's really dead. And I'm her sister Emily," she replied, and told him how she and her sister were separated. Ellie proved to be such a good conversationalist that she wanted to open up fully. She recounted how she woke up in the middle of a graveyard and how a boy, his son, had saved her, told of what she had just learned at his parents' house. Eli listened to her for the first time, looking into her eyes and not wanting to let go. They stood outside his house, not even noticing how nervous his mother was. She kept pulling back the curtain. Seeing Emily made her uneasy again. It had only been a year since she'd managed to marry her precious son to a woman who suited him in every way. Anastasia Victoria Gray had chosen Eli to marry her best friend's daughter, Sarah. Sarah was a high society girl. Always impeccable looking, she knew 4 languages, but she couldn't cook at all. She was arrogant and cold. She was only interested in her job, fashion shows and stupid TV shows. Eli didn't even want to talk to her, but his mother persuaded him to get to know the girl better. Everything pressed on the fact that her father had died, that she was traumatized. That's why she was closed off. Sarah, Eli realized, was just cold and empty. He didn't see any warmth in her, didn't see anything to draw him in. But their parents were persistent. Eli and Sarah began to see each other often. They went to the theater, to the opera. Eli would have preferred something simpler. For example, he was forced to go to plays in a suit, trying to think of something clever to say after Sarah and her abstruse friends discussed the acting and the integrity of the production. He was frankly bored and didn't know how to let loose, how to escape. Eli and Sarah had a lavish, pompous wedding like she had always dreamed of. He was unhappy, and his mother saw it, but she clenched her teeth and said, "This life suits you." Sarah wasn't suited to marriage at all. They moved into a new apartment downtown. They had everything they needed to be happy, except the most important thing.
Eli began to insist on children, and Sarah said she didn't want any. When Eli asked why she married him in the first place if she didn't want a family, his wife softened. But all attempts to conceive failed. They both got tested and found out that Eli was infertile. His parents were ready to send their son abroad, only for him to please them with grandchildren. But Sarah took him to her doctors.
She said she knew the best specialists. They all confirmed that Eli was infertile. It was a blow to him. He withdrew into himself. Marriage seemed like a mistake. Drowning in all these troubling thoughts, Eli arrived at his parents' house that evening. He got out of the car and saw her inside. Everything seemed to shrink. Everything turned upside down for a moment. He felt like he was the same person he'd been before. Eli talked about how he'd met her sister. Iris had taken a job with them when he had just returned from overseas. She was so beautiful that she didn't even need makeup. Emily had a short haircut, and Iris had a waist-length braid. He saw her and couldn't believe his eyes. Such a beauty dusting their place. It turned out that Iris was a great conversationalist, loved Brodsky, Hitchcock, and loved the same things he did. She knew the places in town that made their favorite shawarma with a unique recipe. They would walk around the city at night on foot. She didn't care that he had a car. She loved to walk on her own, to move, and she had accustomed him to it. After their walks together, Eli felt a pleasant fatigue in his legs. He would fall on his bed and fall asleep like a baby. They were just friends, but they couldn't tear themselves away from each other. They talked nonstop, as if they couldn't get enough of each other. She was the only one who made him feel alive. When Eli dared to kiss her, he expected her to push him away. He was nervous, afraid of losing her, but she responded to the kiss by pressing herself against him. Their affair lasted only a few months. Then his mother found out about it and claimed Iris had stolen her son from her. She would have denied it, but she nodded, apologized shamefully, and left their home for good. Of course, Eli followed her. He found her, but Iris refused to speak to him. "Your mom did it. She just confessed it to me. I was confused and scared when I saw you. She'll tell you herself, apparently." and I have to go," Emily said after finishing his story. "I'll see you around." He realized there was a completely different person standing in front of him, but he couldn't help himself as he looked at her. He saw Iris, yes, and talking to Emily was just as easy and pleasant. It was hard to separate the two for himself, but still, it was necessary. After all, they were two different people. "I'm bringing her son here." "I think he's yours." "Eli, no. I can't have children. You need to talk to your mom." "I think you'll learn a lot today." Emily left and Eli went to his parents' house. The conversation was hard. He was angry, grabbing his head, crying. His father and mother hadn't expected this reaction. "Mom, what has she given up to you?" "Johnson isn't a father. She's a redneck, a servant. She's stupid." "Not our level indeed." Eli sank tiredly onto the couch. "She was better than all of us. Better than all of us. I loved her, and now she's dead. And if the baby is mine, I will never forgive you," Eli said as he looked his mother in the eyes and walked away. He didn't know when Emily was coming over. He canceled all business appointments and had been waiting in his car outside his parents' house for her since 8:00. "Why are you sitting here? My mother got divorced. Why are you doing this to her? You know how she is. She always wants the best. She separated me from a woman who was pregnant. If Iris said the baby was mine, then it was mine. I have no doubt about that. It turns out my mother separated me from my child, broke my life. And if Emily hadn't found us, I never would have known I had a son at all." His words were bitterly true. His father nodded. "I didn't expect her to do that either. I mean, she always wanted grandchildren, didn't she? So what? That the girl was poor. I liked Iris, but I thought she really stole," he said. "Anastasia convinced us all of that and intimidated the girl, so she never showed up on our doorstep again. That's how you live with someone for so many years and don't even know what they're capable of."
Toward evening, Iris returned, got out of the car, and Bobby walked beside her. Eli walked over to the boy. My God, the way he was staring at him. "Bobby has her nose. And the rest of him is mine. He's a carbon copy of me. I was fair-haired and easygoing when I was a kid, too."
Eli looked at Emily. She was wearing a long black coat, white snowflakes laying on her short hair. Her eyes looked with tenderness. He still saw her as his love, but he was already aware that she was different, and this did not upset him. On the contrary, he wanted to get to know her better. "We should take a test," Emily said. "I don't even know where they do those tests. I've looked into it. If you want, they'll take us in right now. I just want to say right off the bat that Bobby will be living with me. He doesn't know you at all. And I won't trust him to your mother, I'm sorry." Eli was confused. They both realized that a father would have every right to his son. But after what his mom had done, he didn't argue. "Okay, just let's go over to my place. I want to show him to his grandmother," Eli said. The boy, who had been standing still all this time, suddenly asked, "So you're my daddy, are you? I don't get it." Eli was dumbfounded. "I knew your mom well." "You didn't say anything to him?" Eli asked Emily. The woman shook her head. "We have a lot to tell you. But first, I want a woman to see you. She'll probably cry." "You don't freak out. It's necessary," Eli said. He winked at Bobby and the three of them went into the house. When Anastasia saw the boy, she was stunned. Ellie's father immediately walked over to the child and extended his hand to him. "Well, hello there. You can call me grandfather," he said. "All right. And you call me Bobby? That's what everybody calls me." "That's a funny name you have," the boy replied. Anastasia walked over to the child, knelt down, and cried. She realized that the boy was an exact replica of Eli. There wasn't even any need for a test. Anastasia realized it all at once. Guilt came over her in such a way that she cried and couldn't stop. That's it. That's enough. Take her away," Eli asked his father. He took his wife upstairs, and the trio went to take a DNA test. Afterward, they went to a cafe where they ate ice cream. Eli occasionally wiped away tears. When Bobby talked about the delicious candy he picked up at the cemetery, Eli said, "I'll never forgive her." Emily understood, and she kind of felt sorry for his mom. She had done such a thing, and now she would have to accept the consequences of her deed. Bobby was now an adult and was starting to ask questions until they answered them, going off topic. Eli and Emily agreed that they would tell the boy everything once the DNA test was ready. When it came time to part ways, Eli realized he didn't want to leave. "How am I going to leave him now?" he asked Emily, completely confused. "I just took him away from his drinking stepfather. He promised me he'd get codependent, but I don't believe it. The boy needs to realize everything, get used to it. Besides, I've got a big shaggy dog at home right now. Let me take it for a walk," Eli begged. He couldn't let them go. Had he just gained a son now? Even if it turned out that Bobby wasn't his own, he was still Iris's child, and that was very meaningful to him. "Okay, come with us." Emily realized that Eli didn't want to break up. Except with whom? With her or with the baby? Or still with the Iris he saw in her and Bobby? Probably all of them. Emily was ashamed to realize that she liked Eli a lot, and she thought her sister would have approved of their union. Those thoughts flashed through her mind against her will. She didn't want to think it. But the feelings arose in her on their own. She had fallen in love with Eli as early as yesterday, when she saw how he had reacted to her, and how much he loved Iris. He wasn't like his mother. There was decency in him. He was the victim in this situation. So was Bobby. So was Iris. And girls separated as children who never saw each other for the rest of their lives could well be considered victims too. But there was no bringing their parents back. There was no one left to ask questions. Iris was gone too. There's only Bobby to tell Eli a joke. There's Eli, secretly wiping away tears as he looks at the baby. Emily realized that he would have stayed asleep on the doorstep just to be near his son. They made their way to her apartment. Bobby and Emily began to clean up. Buddy made a mess. Bobby scolded him and scratched his head. He understood. You could see it in his intelligent eyes. Eli walked Buddy for almost an hour. During that time, Emily made dinner. "You know, I feel like you guys are my mom and dad. It's like we have a family," Bobby said to Emily. She wanted terribly badly to tell the boy who she was to him, but she waited for the test result. For some reason, she was scared to talk about it. He'd be sitting in his new room. "I'll go set him up at his new school tomorrow, and I'll quietly tell him that his mom was my sister," Emily told Leo. "Okay, if you want, you can stay at my place. It's a comfy couch," she offered. "Can I? I hate to leave terribly, but that's the way it's going to be tomorrow. You see, I can't leave him now, and neither can I leave you. It's as if I were tied to you. You're supposed to be a wife," she smiled. "Our marriage is a sham, and Eli is my son, so she lied to me. She took me to her doctors, telling me I was infertile. Then one day I found birth control pills on her. She said it was a friend's pills, but I guess I just got caught. We have a really bad relationship. I never loved her, but that doesn't change the fact that you're married. Let me stay because of him. I'll work out my marital status. We'll get back to this conversation." Emily bed Eli on the couch.
She didn't think he was serious. But the very next day, Michael did file for divorce. He didn't even wait for the test results.
"What were you missing?" Iris asked him. She was angry. "Honesty, kids, a wife, and borscht. I'm a husband. Don't you feel like a wife? Running around to your parties, your bohemian parties that make me sick. I want to be at home, watching movies at night. I want the comforts of home. I want to hug my wife, raise my kids, be needed. Do you realize you're married?" Iris threw the glass at the wall and didn't answer him. "You lied to me that I was infertile," Michael asked. "Yes, because I'm not going to ruin my figure for the sake of a schnook, and I did the abortion for you. So get out." "I don't care about you," she said venomously. That was the end of their marriage. That evening, after picking up the lab report, Michael walked up the stairs and rang the doorbell. Emily opened it for him. She was wearing no makeup and a house robe. "I thought you'd call." "Did something happen?" she asked. "I filed for divorce, and I'm also Bobby's father. A kid showed up behind me." "What?" "I'm your daddy." Michael went downstairs and hugged his son. He and Emily told him the whole truth. Michael had several pictures of Iris. Finally, the boy had a picture of his mom. Emily told her side of the story. That same night, Michael got up the courage to tell her that he wanted to be with them. "I know it's rash, but I can't help it. I'm drawn to you. I want to be part of the family since he's my son. Let's raise him together. Let's just try it. Do you want to move in with me? You have a wife, right?" "No, I have my own apartment. But it's a little far from here." "No, it's okay. Bobby just started a new school. You don't have to push him again. I have a big apartment. There's plenty of room for everyone. Stay, the couch is all yours." On one condition, Emily looked at him seriously. "What's that?" "You'll go out with Buddy?" Michael laughed. Aren't you a dog person?" "I am. I was going to get a bald cat on Friday, but now I don't know." At first, Michael flatly refused to talk to his mother and would not show her his grandson. Only Grandpa Edward, who loved Bobby to bits, came to visit. Anastasia could not get through to her son, so one day she came to her mother. She apologized, saying that she repented. Emily and Eli decided to give the grandmother a trial to her grandson. She came to visit them, and told him what she had done to his mom. Bobby listened to her with a serious look. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I want to hang out with you so badly. You're my only grandchild," she said. Okay, he smiled and hugged her. "Will you forgive me?" Grandma repeated. "It's not like you killed anyone. And I don't have many grandmothers to throw around," Bobby replied. Eli, following his son's example, also softened. A year later, when the twins were born, Anastasia helped with them and taught the young mom the finer points of infant care. They became a real family. John did get codependent and became an assistant at a rehab clinic for addicts. Bobby sometimes comes to visit him, and there is a new monument in the cemetery. Emily ordered a beautiful headstone for her sister next to the grave that Jessica and Michael made for her. She kept it in memory of what had happened, and if it hadn't been for their horrible act, she would never have found her happiness.